I can't start early. I'd be really, the Act doesn't allow that. I can start late, not early. I'm just letting you know the live feed's going up.
Right, so behave as those.
Yeah, so if you're still chewing, that could be an issue for you, not for me. I think everyone's pretty right. Everyone enjoy dinner?
Yeah, we tried to use it the other night and it wasn't very successful in here.
Oh, at the business economic.
The Zoom sort of.
Oh, yes.
I could hardly hear anybody when I was on that.
Oh, that's right. You were the little picture in the.
Lip read.
It's the longest minute in history, isn't it? Well, that'll do, man. All right. Welcome, elected members and staff and members of the gallery to the meeting of council for the 22nd of February. And opening the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains region. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land, and we acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. Read you also the council pledge. We seek wisdom and understanding as we face the duties of our united task, praying for the peace and prosperity of our city. Please be seated. And welcome to those streaming in online. Good to have everyone back in the chamber, safely distanced. And let's hope we have a great meeting. I believe we have nil, but we do have an apology, a late apology from Deputy Mayor Larwood to note. Now for declarations by members of a conflict of interest, are there any to record? Didn't envisage any by looking at the agenda, so we'll say there's none. Confirmation of minutes for the council meeting on the 25th of January 2022. Somebody having to move that be confirmed. Councillor Barnett, would you speak to them? I have a seconder. Councillor Wendell, to speak to them. Any further debate?
I just had a question.
Yes. Councillor Harris.
I didn't find it, so I didn't see it. So my question is that the meeting we had, council, that we had, that the stuff you raised came in, which was a confidential stuff, I think.
Yes, CEO.
Can't talk about too much, but is that in these minutes that you were talking about?
CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it is. And I do recall, Councillor Harris, you had a concern around the recording of the voting.
Yep.
So if you were minded to move an amendment to the minutes to capture that, now would be the time.
Okay, well then I'll move that, because it was confidential, and I think it still is, isn't it? But just move that I did not vote in, or if I did,
in the negative.
I voted in the negative.
Let me find it. Where is it on page?
Yeah, I can never find the minutes whenever we talk about it.
Right, so they've been presented to us already, so they're not in the agenda papers per se.
No.
Item 16.1, Mr. Mayor, and just to record that it wasn't a unanimous vote. And that, I think,
Yes, okay.
That's the only difference that needs to
We
be.
had to vote, but
Confirmed. Okay, so let's just get the words correct here. So what you wish to be noted is be confirmed, comma, noting that item 16.1 was not carried unanimously.
Yes, that's all the motion I want to move.
Thank you. The mover happy to incorporate. Yes. Seconder happy to incorporate. I now put that to the vote. All those in favour of incorporating, it is thus incorporated, becomes part of the motion. No amendment necessary. Anything further, Councillor Harris?
That's all, thank you.
Any further debate? No, that concludes the debate. All those in favour? Against, it is carried. Thank you for raising that, Councillor Harris, just to get that right. Okay, next item is public question time with a maximum period of 15 minutes in total if required, a maximum time of 3 minutes per person. I ask, is there any member of the public here to ask a question in public question time? I don't think there is. Any received online or by carrier pigeon or any other means, CEO?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we'll take it that there are no questions in the public question time section. And now move on to item 7, petitions. There are nil. Deputations, there is one from Mr. Peter Linden from the Prospect Arts Action Network. And just invite Mr. Linden to come forward to the deputy's position here to make his address. And for the purposes of the minutes, could you state your name and address?
My name is Peter Linden and my address is 4 Gloucester Street, Prospect, SA 5082.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for your great work on the Prospect Art Action Network. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. As you know, I represent the Prospect Arts Action Network, and we are a recognised body in the COP for advising the Newmarch Gallery. Last time I appeared before you some 2 years ago, it was to outline the options to make the most of the new gallery and what became known as Paendi. And thanks to the decisions you've made, the gallery has become extraordinarily successful. Our street frontage is remarkable and highlights the council's long-term commitment to the arts. Our openings now bring double the previous crowds, always in excess of 100, and the maximum for the COVID restrictions. The movable wall modules we asked you to provide have been used by artists to live the presentations in the work in creative ways that the artists of us in the pan didn't envisage ourselves. Applications for exhibitions are up. In the last year, we had 3 times the number of slots available for this year. And their quality and diversity is noticeably improving. In a side note, the gallery manager, Ed James, is now getting serious inquiries at the rate of about 1 a week. Today, I want to focus on the future. And I'm mindful of the delicate budget discussions you're about to have and the restructuring that's underway. And I want to demonstrate our effective use of the resources you give us and the way we leverage that with other arts organisations. The Newmarch Gallery has an unusual ethos that it is that a community gallery with a contemporary focus, and it's a unique combination for South Australia. And Ed James has been asked to advise no less than 3 other councils on the way we management systems. To the community side of things, in May we'll present our schools exhibition where teachers from a number of local schools work with students not only to make the art, but to also take part in all the other aspects, from catering right through to emceeing. And these, I have to really say, are the most joyous of all openings. There are 3 generations celebrating the art of their young ones, and we make sure they know that it's the council that makes it happen. In July, we'll have the 23rd Community Art Show. It's a come one, come all approach with entry numbers increasing. It's so popular that it's now an annual event and coincides with the South Australian Living Artists Festival. On the contemporary side of things, a few highlights from the end of this year. In September, a show called Shadow of the Moon. Now, the Art Gallery of South Australia has recognised the strength of this show and is supporting it with some of their own works. We're the only council gallery that the Art Gallery of South Australia trusts in this way. The artist has applied for a state government grant to help mount the show, so leveraging the resources we offer. In November, From My Room brings art from the room of a disabled person and comes under the umbrella of the Feast Festival. In December, Dream Tetras by locals Mike Ladd and Kathy Brooks is on, and it's just been announced that the Wakefield Press will publish their book to coincide with the exhibition. We also have artist talks, art classes and workshops associated with all our exhibitions. In the future, we'll extend our association with the Adelaide Film Festival, which last time showed night projections through the street window. And production is underway for another Reconciliation Week video featuring the work of an Indigenous artist who recently made one of the murals on Prospect Road. And this is being made pro bono by a retired professional TV producer. Taking note of Council's Paendi Kumanga project, we too are taking the long view. Our plans for this year include seeking discussion with the reference group once it's formalised, then to get external funding to collaborate with local Indigenous artists for a future exhibition. Finally, I'd really like you to know that the gallery has been superbly served by, hesitate to call it, but it's true, the dream team of Ed James and until recently Merrin Fife. The PAN earnestly hopes that Merrin's replacement brings the same skills, commitment and energy to the role. Thank you.
Thank you. 30 seconds up your sleeve if you want
See? There's a few bits I missed out, but, I think going backwards at this point is...
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions from elected members? Councillor Harris.
Yeah, just one. You mentioned the Indigenous things that are going to happen and quite happy with it. We also, the City of Prospect is coming to a certain age, and we hopefully as a council are going to do something to recognise that. Is it possible the PAN group would be trying to do something similar within the City of Prospect about its age? Can you remind me how old I'll be then? No, what age, what anniversary are we talking about? 150th. Sesquick. Okay, certainly. Yeah. Yep. Better make sure we've got funds.
It's this year in August.
Yeah.
It's about any time this year.
Oh, okay. Right.
So you won't be much older.
Thank you. Well, that might be a good place to talk with the local history group, who've got an admirable collection of photographs. Yeah. And they could be projected on that big screen that you let us have. Is a nighttime version and giving that street frontage a bit more life. Yeah.
Councillor Group.
Thanks, Peter. You mentioned budget, and I thought you were going to go into a conversation about budget, but I'm going to maybe give you an opportunity. As we think about our budget going forward, beyond the manager role that you mentioned, what else do you want us to keep in mind in terms of public art and budget as we deliberate in the next 2 or 3 months?
Thank you for the question, and that's not easy to answer. The PAN is an advisory group, so we are keen to see that the existing resources continue and allow the creativity and good work of the staff, with assisted by the volunteers, to continue certainly at the rate it is. We would be seeking extra funds, hopefully externally as well as internally, for the Indigenous exhibition. And we just really want you to know that we're doing a damn fine job and keeping the reputation of this council right up front, locally and across the state. Further submissions might come through later, but I think that's probably for the following year.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor De Backer.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the efforts of the team that put everything together. I'm really interested in how PAN aligns with our current community plan, and part of that has been community facilitated. But I'm also interested, we've got some big projects coming up, for example, the Broadview Hub, and I'm interested how the PAN is looking at the outreach, like with the schools, in maybe the eastern side of the city, if there's any plans. And
all I can say is that we'd be delighted to know more about it. It's not something that's come up in discussions. Yeah. And we will. I might ask. Could I ask one more, David, just so the plan follows that?
Yep. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, just to follow that question, I believe, and I'm almost going to put the word, does PAN do a lot with schools and art and that as well, with various schools from the other side of the road and elsewhere? Certainly of the schools that are being pursued at the moment, one of them's Nailsworth. This is for the schools show, and we try and keep that spread and mindful that it doesn't kind of just lopsidedly slide towards the sea, because that's not what Prospect is. Yeah. Thank you. That's where I live.
Any further questions for the Deputy? If not, thank you, Mr. Linden, for your presentation, and again, thank you for the work that PAN does. If you could relay the feedback and support from the elected members to them, would be appreciated.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
Okay, well, and you're more than welcome to stay for the balance of the meeting, Mr. Linden, if you want. But if you had petunias to prune or hair to wash or whatever, and you need to slip home, that we'd understand.
That's very kind of you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 9, which is questions without notice. Are there any? Councillor Group first.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question in relation to Scotty's Motel Corner. The road widening has now been widened. We now have a block of land there that is smaller, narrowed. Just want to know if there's any update in terms of the use for that land or what might happen once the road widening has, or the infrastructure there has been cleared out.
We have had some discussions with the department. I'm happy for the CEO to round anything out that I might miss, but they purchased the properties and we've checked, because I've been asked recently, they own 6 titles across there, from street to street. They own it all. They were contemplating selling it back to the market, but they have retained it to do the works from Nottage into North East Road, which they've announced as a subsequent project worth about 6 million, and they've commenced changing the underground services. You'll see they put a fence up in front of a property there. So that work has sort of started, and I'll keep staging that work out of that same site. I haven't had an update from them as to what they will do after that's finished, but that's probably about maybe 5 months' work, something like that. I don't know. So, CEO, with it,
through you, Mayor Lachlan, no, nothing like that.
and Councillor Barnett.
Yes, a lot of members of our community, especially some of the residents that were involved with the possum mural that used to be on the wall on Elizabeth Street facing the Charles Kane Cardinal Yurta, has been, well, one can only say blacked out in the true sense of the word, black paint. Anyway, my question is there the possibility that council could explore, perhaps I guess with the arts team and with the 2 lessees of the BOSA and the Eagles Lacrosse Club, about some way that we could perhaps reinstate a similar, or there's a photographic representation that we have on our council's website and with all the artwork. So my question is, could it be explored that we can somehow, retain the spirit of the possum mural, much loved by the community?
Thank you, Councillor. CEO.
Through you, Mayor Lachlan, it's a big topic. It invites a whole number of unanswered questions that go beyond the simple question of could we do that? The answer is yes, we could, but we'd need to identify a place to put it. And councillors are aware of the fact that there are challenges with that particular wall, that it's not a wall that we have the capacity to just paint something on. That's why the mural was painted over, and why, as a council, there's not much really we can do about it. It's private property.
Actually indicated maybe it's sports club rooms that we do.
So a different location potential, yes. Then obviously the question would be budget and timeframes. Both of which would require some exploration, and I'd have to take those questions on notice if those are questions that the council was keen for us to look into.
That'd be fine. Yeah, thank you. Any further questions without notice? Councillor DeBacker.
Yeah, just through the chair, I was just inquiring of the status of the heritage street signs. I think back when we had a previous CEO, we'd had a workshop about the street signs and plaques, and we still haven't seen any visible. So I sort of see it as a key communication piece as part of all the good work we've done. And I'd just really like a date of when that's going to be completed.
CEO.
Before I pass over to Director Community and Planning, I will say members will recall that there was a budget bid that was accepted as part of the last budget review. So the money in terms of budget's only been formally available for a relatively short period of time. But with that in mind, I will ask Mr. Cunningham to address that.
Thank you. And through the chair, the latest on that is that Scott prepared some mock-ups, so that assessment manager prepared some mock-ups, which went out to elected members to the CEO update a night ago, or it might have been 4 weeks ago. Thanks for the members who provided some feedback. There was a lead of the 3. I think historic area might have been the one. Forgive me if that may be incorrect off the top of my head, but one of the 3 was a standout in terms of feedback. So Scott is getting quotes now for them to be manufactured, and then they'll be installed. And to lower the cost of the install, they'll be done by the depot team as they move around the city, as the original designs were done.
Thank you. Any further questions to that notes? Councillor Group?
Sorry, just on Councillor Barnett's question earlier, and thank you, Councillor Barnett, for the question. I just have another question about the possum mural. Did Council receive a request or an application to paint over that mural? I don't. Well, yeah, I'll ask that as a question.
Yeah.
So through you, Mayor Lachlan, my understanding is no.
Can any director update us on?
So
Yeah, is that okay?
certainly through the chair, there were some emails that floated around in the immediate aftermath, and I've prepared a little summary that's going out in the CEO update tomorrow. But in advance of that, essentially, because it was on a private wall, there was no obligation to advise or seek approval. There's no long-standing agreement on that site. There's nothing registered on the title. And we've got no record of anyone making an inquiry. A year ago, when Cannoli Box moved in, an inquiry was made, and that company was advised that it's not restricted. However, we would encourage them to keep it, and they kept it. But a new tenant appears to be moving out the back and has received landowner consent, which is the only consent required.
So following on from that, do we have within council at the moment any agreements with landlords for other murals and other private properties? I know we've got a few. Do we have any agreements at the moment with those landlords around trying to preserve the murals?
So yeah.
Director of Community Plan.
Through the chair, off the top of my head, I am aware of the agreement on History of Australia mural. However, I believe it's lapsed. So it's in good faith that it continues to sit there, essentially.
Other sites?
I think of one through the chair.
Dog FX. Well, there's a mural on the corner of Dog FX.
There are 20 or so of them. Yeah.
It's quite true, yeah.
And the discussions from the arts teams, murals by their very nature can be temporary. And whilst I think my own personal view would be I'd like to sort of enshrine them all, that's not essentially how this council or other councils have done that over the years, with the exception of a few. And it's an option that exists, but it takes negotiation and time.
I am aware that the Public Art Advisory Group, which is not PAN, the other group, have indicated that some of the 25 grand recurrent budget for public art should be spent on murals because some of them are quite old. And there's been a couple on Braun Road that have been touched up in a way that preserves the original intent but gives it a fresh coat of paint, so to speak. And the artists have been either recommissioned or new artists engaged. So that's an ongoing process, and it's a matter of, at that point, they seek a new agreement, if you like. But the only way to preserve them is to put a note on the title, the property title, so it's enforceable. And I'm only aware of the Australiana mural having that, and it was for 25 years, and it expired about 4 years ago and became a bit of a concern. But staff negotiated its retention at the moment. So, yeah, it is tricky because most landowners don't want to have something on their title. So, they're temporary is how we should consider them. But, yeah.
Can I just foreshadow maybe a motion later on under urgent business, if I can?
I hope you're writing it up as you speak.
I will provide it to the appropriate person. One last question. Our Pulse artwork outside of Foodland flatline recently. Is there an update, not preempting something that might come out tomorrow as well, but is there any update on where that's at in terms of responsibility or fixing it?
Yeah.
So through you, Mayor Lachlan, there are possible legal processes which I can't discuss around responsibility and accountability for the damage, and those will run their course. The damaged, as a damaged asset, has been reported to our insurer, Local Government Risk Services. We have every expectation that they will take steps to reinstate it. In my discussions with the Mayor today, I've been made aware of certain interesting issues around that particular piece of art and some unique features that we're going to have to consider as a component of that work, particular to the artist who originally put it together. That will be taken on board by staff as part of that process. I will say this, I've been very clear with staff. Obviously, we're not going to reinstate it until any further risk to that artwork in that location is past. And in the interim, of course, we would expect local government risk services to take steps to recover any loss from either the construction contractors or the developer. So there's a lot of water to pass on the bridge, obviously, very early stages. But yes, in terms there's a criminal and a civil side to it. Both are in train.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Just to follow that same thing, sorry. Okay, you can't talk because of various things, and I'm happy, well, not happy with that, but I'm happy for the answer. But my concern comes the sort of subcontractors that some of these people use, and particularly where the position is, if we got in our authority to put up a hoarding there for all work that goes on there, too late now for the demolition, but for the continuing work, do we know if that's part of the plan to have a proper walkway hoarding in that building?
Yeah. Interesting question. I'll put that one to
It's
the infrastructure.
Thank you, through the Mayor.
I'm going to say far apart in this room.
We're currently working with the property owners to negotiate the appropriate agreements to support the appropriate type of hoarding for the construction works. We expect to have agreement on that prior to them actually commencing formal movement on construction.
so a covered walkway.
The demolition process, they didn't need a hoarding for that. They probably should have had one in hindsight, but they didn't need to apply for one. They did have to get our authority to put up the fence that didn't actually prevent the damage occurring to our construction.
My chooks could have got out that fence.
But through the Mayor, that was all that was actually legally required at this point. And they also needed appropriate agreements from DIT as well, which we believe they have got as well. So we are working with them though on when they get to construction stage, the appropriate hoarding to protect and allow pedestrian flow.
Thank you. Further, councillor? Any further questions without notice? If not, we'll move on. Thank you to item 10, which is reports for decision. First of those, 10.1, waste management in multi-unit dwellings. An update report, the recommendation on page 4.
Can I just ask a question? Possible? Would it be possible, because I have a couple of questions to ask on this, would it be possible to suspend meeting procedures for this item, just to seek a couple of clarifications on the wording in the recommendations of the meeting behind them?
Yeah, sure. It's a complex item. I'm happy to seek leave of the meeting to suspend meeting procedures until, say, 7:45. All those in favour? Against, us suspended. And over to you.
Yeah. I just want to, thanks for that, Mayor. Appreciate it, and councillors. Just want to seek clarification. So are we saying, particularly on item, I'm just confused on the wording, we're saying for item, particularly for item 2, that we're deciding not to introduce financial assistance payment towards past or existing multi-unit dwellings, or is it just for future ones? Because I'm just confused, because it says that if I'm reading it right, in point 2, and then point 3, it says non-standard waste collection service to multi-unit dwellings in case where the development can meet service criteria. So we're saying for multi-unit dwellings there that can't meet the service criteria that are existing, we're not going to provide them with the waste. I just want to get this crystal clear before we vote tonight.
That's correct, Sue.
Yes, through you, Mayor Lachlan. Yes, I mean right now we're not providing that service to those multi-unit dwellings.
No, I just wanted, because
Yes.
So
with these.
largely not only the service, but not a refund or any contribution towards costs.
I was reading it that we're not providing a rebate for existing multi-unit dwellings that can't meet the service, and we're not going to do, I guess, the future services. Well, I was wondering.
Vincent, want to add anything to that?
All I would say is there are certain marks that are just technically impossible for us to access through any reasonable means with the equipment that we've got available.
Could you just give us an example of one of those if one comes to mind?
I can't name one particularly. I think we've got Di on Zoom at the moment who might be able to give a specific example, but otherwise the normal situation is the where the bins are actually stored on the property, access aspects in regards to how you get to them, distance involved in trying to access those bins and get them out, space to actually bring the bins out, to actually have them being able to be picked up by a truck. It could even be the height of floor heights, preventing access under buildings and all that.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want specifics, we can give you a couple of them.
So just to note, we do have the officer on hand if we need to ask a technical question. Eddie, you had a couple of questions?
Yeah, I did. And another one. Sorry, Councillor Baker, so you had your...
No, you.
Thanks. And I just wanted to have, we really then looked at, for the ones that we can't currently access, do we look at other alternatives where we can, where about those shared bins? I just wanted to arrange it to those. So would there be, or different models where there could be one bin placed out the front of a big sort of bin, different, do we look at different strategies to try and service those in a different way? Or
Okay, so we've got further work to do on some of that, quite honest.
So, yeah,
There's certain situations where they've already got approval for a number of council current standard bins, so we'd have to negotiate in terms of those if we felt there's better ways to do it. And that might open up other issues in regard to where those bins then sit on those properties and the like. So there is still a body of work that we'll go through individually to see if we get better outcomes, especially as we look to go down the 3 streams of waste collection rather than in some cases it might only be 2. So there is actually still some further engagement and individual site visits required to go through some of those complexities. But like where one of the older masters, they've got 10 of our existing bins, for instance, it may well be to negotiate something better there, but that is still to be done.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that part of it, because I mean, I know I don't want to sway into the debate side too much, but I know it's on page 9, we're giving the 3 main reasons why we're not going to do X, Y, and Z. But to me, I think we can be different and we can look at different things. And just because the bulk of councils don't do something or do things a different way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way. So I do challenge our thinking, not just to those last points on page 9. I'll talk about it in debate, but I want to see us look at things differently other than just status quo, certain things. That's just my thoughts.
Yep. Thank you. Alison.
Yeah, I had a couple of points of clarification before we get it on the floor. Just in regards to no more than 10 bins. Now, what I would have liked to maybe seen in the report is some of the bylaws, because the thing is,
Sorry, I'm just asking if the officers ready to answer.
Okay, yeah. So just what I would have liked to have seen is some of the bylaws associated with this. So obviously, where you put the bins, you know, if you say 10 bins, the current agreements we've got now with the landscaping that's say on Churchill Road or Prospect Road, and then, you know, if someone needs to get past on a bike or with a pram or with a wheelchair, are some of those in breach of some of the bylaws? And I haven't really sort of seen those bylaws associated with this report. The other thing is, my understanding is that you're allowed to put them on the road, but if the road is a bike lane at a certain time of day, that would also not be allowed. So I think it's a bit broader than just bins out on the street, because I think there's actually some other bylaws that we could say, well, actually they're in breach, so they shouldn't actually be entitled to correct pickup. So maybe just through to the officer, have the bylaws been considered as part of this report?
Oh, good question. We can have the officer.
Or maybe
I'm happy for Di to answer that. I can give a general answer.
So, Di, are you available to answer that question?
Yes, while I'm online.
Hi, Di. So, did you hear the question around whether bylaws have been considered in relation to preparing the report and the recommendations?
Yeah, so we have bylaw 6, which is related to waste management, and it does provide direction as to where bins can be located. So we do direct it's on the same side of the road and in front of a property, or unless otherwise directed by council. So that might be in some instances where we might say it could temporarily go on the road. It also requires when bins need to be brought back onto the property. But there's nothing specifically in there about 10 bins. That was in the development plan.
Probably doesn't clarify, because there's actually a couple of other bylaws in regards to accessibility on a pavement. So we've got landscaping, and if 10 bins go out, they put them on the pavement, or in some cases on Prospect Road, they put them on the road, which is a bike lane between. So those other additional sets of laws, they've been considered. Okay.
Not in this instance. That would be something I'd need to look at. Thanks.
I think it'd be fair to say that the bylaws are existing and these would need to fit within those unless there's a good reason to change them. I mean, as far as I'm aware, you're not supposed to put your bin on the road at all. As far as I'm aware, you need to leave 1,200 mil clear on a footpath, full stop. There might be an issue where the bins have to be arranged so one's behind the other to make sure that it isn't on the road and isn't on the footpath, but there's a fatter section of the pavement. Di, just help us understand, is that something that you could negotiate with the MUD manager about how the bins are arranged on the whatever land's available outside the building?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're proposing would be an assessment on a case-by-case basis. In the first instance, we could look at providing curbside bins at a larger capacity that can still be lifted by the side lift, which would reduce the need to give those really large bins. But then, yeah, you would have to negotiate with each individual manager of the MUDs to see how the bins will be presented, because East Waste are willing to service the front of the property, but what they won't do is go 20 metres onto a property and drag a bin right out the front. So that's where you have to enter an agreement with the MUDs as to how the waste gets out onto the curbside and how it's presented. So there's no one fits all solution. It's on a case-by-case basis and taking into all those considerations.
Just a side note too, because we're out of meeting procedures, if we could not refer to someone's home as a mud, that would be good. I know it creeps into the lexicon, but if it could keep out, that would be great. These are Alison, do you have anything further? Present.
Yes, I think part of the key thing is under page 7, under the heading non-standard service operations for future MUDs.
Thank you.
And it points out that good building and waste management design will ensure that MUDs can access council's waste collection service in the future. Intervention must happen at the design phase of a development to allow for the best waste collection system and so forth. But it looks like we're only going to be providing well, not only it's a good thing to do, but provide developers with information and guidelines for access to a council-provided waste collection service. So we're still not really getting deeper into what I believe is more the good design principles. And I'm wondering for advice or something to come back to us more along the lines of where in our development plan are we allowed to make this more enforceable about good design principles. Yeah, that's a thing that
relating to waste in particular.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Happy to put that one to.
Yes.
Thanks. The Planning and Design Code provides some guidance in relation to referring out to, I think it's key SAPS principles, which talk about the average amount of waste used per person per household, which then guides an applicant in terms of how many bins are needed and guides our assessment in terms of what size that bin area needs to be. So I would call it relatively good guidance, not so much about where that should sit on the site or how it's presented, but certainly about how big in order to make sure that it's satisfactory for the amount of waste likely to be generated. So the code does refer out to other standards, which does allow that conversation through the assessment process to then be reinforced by a condition. But what we find with most is that they're out back or in the underground. From a design point of view, that's probably the right thing to do. From an efficiency point of view, we might want them close to the street. As a general rule, what we see is an out the back, wherever the back may be, down the end of the driveway, a shared driveway, or in an location. Yeah, there's good guidance on how big, not so much guidance on its design, but often they're in locations that aren't particularly visible.
So my follow-up is then how do we get better design or wording into the development plan as an amendment? I'm sure there are other councils in the metropolitan area that might be perhaps interested in this as well, because otherwise we're just going to be on, some developers will think it's a good thing to do and perhaps even a selling point. If we could, somehow get more traction on that side of things, I would like to somehow see that happen.
Well, it's a statewide code now, so we could essentially probably start through ERA in understanding whether or not it's a common problem faced in a metro, which I imagine it is. I mean, we're not completely unique to it. So I think that would be a useful starting point, and then possibly the planning commission to say, we think you can do it. But it's no longer a prospect issue that we can resolve through a prospect amendment. It's if there's enough of an issue collectively, we can request the State Planning Commission look at it, or we can look at it on their behalf. But I would think that this is an issue that's broad enough to suggest the Commission look at it.
If I can add to that, there are efforts that the Mayor and I both have been undertaking in our advocacy recently with both current and prospective state representatives advocating along a number of aspects around the planning and design code and the process itself in terms of code amendments and how they're operating in the current environment. We don't like it, and I think there is some expectation that there might be some pressure there, but there's also in many areas there's an unwillingness to listen to some of our proposals. I think that's fair. Meryl?
Yeah, I think so. I think post-election is a fertile time to get into how waste is managed in all sorts of ways. It's too sensitive at an election for a politician to come out and just say anything radical. But when they know they've got 4 years ahead of them to think and act radically and then let it settle down, they're a lot more open-minded. So that's my advice around contentious waste issues. In terms of planning, it would need a lot more thought. I'm really keen to give this a go and learn from it, because if we're not careful, there'll be a code amendment that says all the bins for a big, apartment building have got to be at the front of the building so that the council service will pick them up. Well, we'd be the last people to say that's a great place to have bins. So I think we just need to get into this space and try and work out what is the right way to do it. I like the idea, as the officers mentioned, of 360 litre bins, and whether that's enough to cope with a reasonable portion of the waste, if not all of it, in a smaller development. It might be an easy problem to solve because they're a side lift, and as I understand it, and maybe if the officer to clarify this, but as I understand it, a 360 litre bin can be picked up by the existing trucks. Is that correct?
Diane?
Absolutely. So that's correct. What you can do is upsize. We currently provide 140 litre waste bins, landfill bins, the red lids. We can upgrade those to 360. And likewise with the recycling, moving it up from 240 to 360. What we can't do is move the green waste up to 360 because that would be too heavy for the side lift to lift.
Even so, Diane, that might need some work, and using how it's going to roll it, because the apartment buildings don't have a lot of foliage. So you might find in time that could also work as a 360. But I do think there's a learning path, and from that we're going to get good policy which can marry up with the code, and in time the policy could turn into a code amendment. And then I wouldn't want to rush because I think we'll get it. I want to get the best answer. Any other questions while we're out of meeting procedures?
Just one more. So it's just in regards to the legality of, because we've done so much landscaping on our main roads, if people are allowed to put bins on top of the landscaping, is there a bylaw against that?
Is there a bylaw against it? That's a good question.
Through you, Meryl, and I'd have to take it on notice unless...
I don't believe the bylaw particularly deals with it, but we can direct the property owners where they can place their bins.
As mentioned by the officer.
I would suspect there's not, because you can place the bins on your lawn on your nature strip right now. So I don't think we differentiate between landscaping that can cope with bins to landscaping that can't cope with bins. I remember in the early days of the Churchill Road upgrade, we allowed nothing for bin pads, and people had to put their bins somewhere, and so they squashed all the new plants. And so we went back and put in paving pads. I think that's got to be part of the learning curve.
Because I'll circulate a photo, but this is a good example where you do have bins quite clearly on our landscaping, and I think we have to look really clearly at the money we're spending on some of the landscaping, because I'm in favour of landscaping, but we have to allocate areas. And if you're a developer, you'd want an allocated area for, waste collection. So I think that's something that we need to think about seriously.
Absolutely. And that's a townhouse site, is it? That you?
It looks like a townhouse site adjacent I won't say it out.
Block of flats.
Block of flats. I'll happily circulate the image.
Lots to learn. Any other questions?
When people buy into these multi-unit dwellings, are they not informed about that they have to enter into private collection themselves?
Yes, they are. The issue has come because the residents of Belford Apartments have brought a deputation to us saying, thanks for letting us know, but we're paying the same council rates as other people who are getting a bin service. So either give us a discount or give us a bin service. That's equitable. And I think the question is a good question. How we answer it is, I think, what we're working through now. But yeah, they are aware when they move in, the body corporate rules say to them they have to pay a body corporate fee, which in part pays for a waste service. Yeah. That's not in question. The question is, well, why are we paying twice? Yeah. We're actually out of time. Is there anything else? I'll bring us back to formal session. Thanks for the discussion and clarification. Is somebody happy to move the recommendation as it's provided to us?
I'll move it.
Councillor Barnett, do you wish to speak to it?
No, I think there have been some good points made, and I think it's a good starting point at the moment. So I'm going to say that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearce, do you wish to speak to it?
Look, when this report came up before, I was one that suggested that existing MUDs receive a rebate and future ones not. So therefore, the developers can look at the design and make an account for the. But I think this is a very good report, and I've read it a couple of times, and it drills down on inequality, which I think. I now look at this and want to recommend that we do this, that the past ones don't get it and nor do the future ones. I mean, when a person is buying a unit and anyone buying a house or whatever, like it's caveat emptor, you do your due diligence. And now these people have bought into Belford Avenue. They're aware they're paying a certain community or strata fee to accommodate maintenance of the lift and cleaning and bin collection. So they've bought into that knowing that, and then to come back later and say, well, what about a rebate? Doesn't wear very well with me. And I think this report sort of looks at future. If we go this way with future ones as well, it's a big cost issue which we just keep more to play. So I support this recommendation.
Thank you. Any further debate? Councillor De Backer.
Look, I support it, but I'd certainly be open to review. I think it's really important that there is equity. So if we're talking about amenity, in front of some of these new apartment buildings, there's been, no landscaping done, or there's been no additional paving done. I know there's a lot of dust in front of the Belford apartments at the moment, and they pay a good deal of rates. And so I think we have to, we've got an arts team as well. So I think, okay, maybe we can't do the waste collection, and that's something that the amenity is better. And like Councillor Pearce said, that rate that you pay every month or whatever goes to the lift and the fire service and all that kind of thing. However, what we can do is say, well, we do have this, arts opportunity, or we do have the ability to improve the amenity at the front with landscaping and things like that. So I think we need to keep the conversation going, and though I support the motion, I'd be open to revisiting it when the state and neighbouring councils have a considered approach.
Thank you. Any further debate?
Yes, well, let someone else speak first, but I've got a proposed amendment to part 2. I don't know if you can move this as an amendment because it will obviously change the context. So I'll put it out, but I'll obviously to your advice. I would actually like to flip part 2. I've just sort of written up something here that a report come back to the April council meeting. So this will change part 2 dramatically. A report come back to the April council meeting on all the different options for a rate rebate for multi-unit dwellings or current multi-unit dwellings that can't be serviced by waste collection. I can talk to that, but obviously it does change the context, so it might be appropriate for an amendment.
You got it written up at all?
So a report come back to the April 2022 council meeting. We'll come at the April 2022 council meeting on all the different options available for a rate rebate for existing multi-unit dwellings that can't access council-based collection services. And that's the replacement on part 2, and I'll just check in. I'm just rechecking through. So the light here is really bad with those globes. It actually really affects. It's already here. I'll leave it there. I just wanted to maybe change number 0.2.
I'm just cognizant that some of this is in the report, but in terms of, I have it just floor, but in terms of, it might not be an alternative part 2, it might actually be a part 4. And to make that work, you could propose to change in part 2 after the word determines to insert the word was mentioned at this stage.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. That doesn't totally annihilate point 2, but I think
give that some thought. But the amendment is yours.
Determines not. And then what? Okay, I'm happy to with that suggestion, so it doesn't totally annihilate point 2. It becomes a new point 4, and point 2 changes at this stage, not 2. I'm happy with that. Yep.
Okay, can we just get that up?
Point 2, I mentioned is point 4, and point 2 the consideration. This stage, consideration. So after multi-unit dwellings, but we got the comma. Yep. At this stage, determines not 2, and then I've got a new point 4 is what the mayor was saying.
Yes. Okay, so that gets me around the technicality of is it a negative? I can say it's not a negative, so I'm happy to, if you finish speaking to it.
Well, if you want me to talk to it, or do you need to get a second mover and second before I talk to it?
I can test with the mover and seconder first, if you like. The mover happy to incorporate that change.
Yes.
That's all I need at this stage. Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Pearce, happy to.
Well, I'm just wondering whether it's already there in the table 2. There's 16 muds that.
It's a yes or a no, Councillor, and it's only in the resolution, whether it's in the report or not, is a matter for debate. Are you happy to incorporate or not incorporate?
Yep, happy to record. Yep.
Okay, thank you. And I'll seek leave of the meeting to incorporate the change. All those in favour? Against is thus incorporated. Councillor Rip, you still have the floor if you need it.
Yeah. Look, ultimately, I'm happy. I'm actually happier with, so it's not that double negative, to go with the at this stage determines. Overall, I feel in the long term, I think for these residents, we're going to have to seriously look at breaking down multiple options for them, because I think they are severely disadvantaged, and by I guess council not, and look, it's current practice, I understand, but I do feel they are a disadvantage. My opinion is people pay rates, and perception is that they expect to be able to access all council services. That's perception I think the bulk of the community would have. And I believe when we look at like page 9, for example, on those 3 dot points, and we say to people, all residents pay rates with provisions and services. Residents who live in, can basically dispose of their waste bins in a public realm. I think we start getting a bit dangerous. So we're sort of saying to people here who live in multi-unit dwellings, well, take your garbage, all your garbage from your home, take your recycling, take your green and food waste, and dump it in the park bins. Is that what we're saying? I don't know. And I noticed on a number of our parks that then you can't break down necessarily the green and food waste. So we're saying dump all that green and food waste from every multi-unit dwelling into the red bin that goes to landfill. That totally defeats the purpose. So I think just want to think about that as well. We look at dot point 2, where it says, likewise, the rates paid by council contribute to pools, libraries that not all residents through the city access, but are still important. I understand that. And it's true that not all residents, for example, will choose to access the library, but they're not excluded from accessing the library. And I think that is the key difference. We don't say to residents in the city, any resident in the city prospect, we refuse you access. Well, I said horribly, but don't behave appropriately. We don't actually say to our residents, you're excluded from accessing the library, you're excluded from accessing the parks. But we do for multi-unit dwellings accessing waste services. Dot point 3 talks a user-only pay system is a very slippery slope. Well, I see that to a point, but I think this is a rare example where we're actually denying access to services. It's not residents choosing not to access services. So I think there's a distinct difference, I believe, in this one. Look, it's not a simple solution, but I do believe in the long run that it's not unreasonable when people pay the same rate, they physically can't access, they're not choosing not to. So I think there is a key difference. And I think it's, and it might only be if we, and I respect the report. The report is a really good report, and I do thank the staff for pulling it together because it can be a controversial topic. But the report, whilst it's good and it looks at the fact that one council does provide a rebate or a financial assistance payment, that might be true that only one council does in the state, but there's no reason to say we can't be a second. And when you look at sort of first, years ago, waste collection services for hard rubbish, every council used to be at call. Someone had to go to an annual, someone had to start the process. And just because a council was the first at doing something doesn't mean they were wrong to do so. And other councils have now followed suit. So we might find that one day we're the second one to introduce a rebate and a heap follow suit when they see particularly the benefit for investment in the long run, that it's not a roadblock to investment either. Because obviously we're encouraging more of these type dwellings, and particularly our main arterial roads, and that could be an investment roadblock. I'm not an expert in that space, but it could be. So I think, when we want to attract more of the multi-unit dwellings in the future, we could try and be an innovative council that looks at the different opportunities where either if we physically can't at a location access it and do it, we offer a rebate. Where we can find a joint solution, we provide the joint solution. But I think I'd like to see us look at this further moving forward. So it wasn't a negative. That was my purpose to moving that amended or slightly different point 2 and adding point 4. Thank you.
Yes, 4 minutes and 61 seconds. Well done. Any further debate on this item?
I have a question.
Brief question.
So I'm just wondering if the multi-unit development is defined, and if it's defined in a development plan, it's certainly not in the report.
Technical question, CEO.
Ask the Director of Community Planning to take them on.
Through the chair, no reference or definition that I can think of in the planning and design code. So it's probably important for the council to define in its policy.
So I'm not sure, did you hear that, Diane? Did you hear that answer?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Your hearing's better than mine. It is a very important question because the photo that Councillor Tobacco distributed is of a row of townhouses. So can I ask, is a row of townhouses classified as a multi-unit dwelling in the context of this report and policy?
Diane?
It's been defined as a building that has a strata or community title attached to it.
Okay, yep, so that's a bit clearer.
In the report?
Is that in the report anywhere, Diane?
Ooh, I'll have to double check.
Through you, Mayor Lachlan, I've read the report a couple of times.
I don't believe it's from memory. Yeah.
We could leave it on the table.
It may have been defined in the earlier report.
Yes,
This is policy.
Good question. It was a brief question and no time for debates for Councillor Backer, which has already spoken, but that obviously is part of what we're learning and needs to be defined going forward. So we'll take any further debate on this item. Just from the chair, I think it's time we move forward on this. There is a basic equity question. There has been in councils with multi-unit dwellings, apartments, townhouses, group homes for years, and it's been led by councils running away, but charging the same amount. A lot of regional councils have a separate waste levy, and they don't do it because they've got apartment buildings. They do it because they've got remote properties to the townships. Think farmhouses that are quite some distance away, and running a truck out there doesn't make any sense for the council. So they say, well, you won't have to pay, but the way they do it is not a rebate. They have a separate charge for the waste service, and you don't get charged a separate charge. So that's a simpler method. I'm not aware of a Metro Council doing that. See, I might ask that question. Are you aware of any Metro Council with a waste service charge?
I have to take that one on notice unless Mr. Camille.
Director?
I know of a near city council that does it, but I don't know of one in the city.
Yeah, okay. So that this confirms my thinking that because we're getting more multi-unit dwellings in Adelaide now, the question's becoming more prominent. Adelaide City Council has led the way on this in terms of, firstly, pushing it back on the owners, and secondly, trying to work out how to offer services that help with recycling and diversion from landfill. There's a little bit to learn there. But as we've heard in the discussion, which is very helpful, there are some basic design issues around this. If the proponent proposes right from the start a community-funded waste service, they'll contact a provider who will have a certain track design and design a waste area for them. Once they commit that, they might have chutes through the building to direct the waste to that place. It's very difficult to change practices to suit what a council service might want to do. And you be aware, our trucks don't have riders on the back. They don't have a passenger. So if there's some handling of the bin that's required, the driver has to park the truck safely, get out and manoeuvre the bin and so on and so forth. So it's quite an extra task. So without predicting what the answers are, I can clearly see the problem and I can clearly see the equity issue. And I think that that propels me towards supporting steps towards finding better solutions. I think the report's really good. Thank the staff for thinking through these issues. It's the second detailed report we've had on it. I'm pretty sure, CEO, there'll be a third report after there's been some service provision and some learnings, and perhaps 12 months will be the maximum time for us to see it, other than what's in the current motion for the report on one part of it in April. So I'd commend the motion to you. I think it's a good next step. Any further debate? Councillor Backer, you have another?
So can we take it in parts?
I'm happy to take it in parts. There's no further debate. Councillor Barnett, you wish to sum up?
Yes, I think there have been some good points raised, and I think look forward to the next report coming. I'm just mindful that we should not let the matter of a rebate situation reward bad design. So I'm hopeful that, as been said in the discussion, that after the elections we may be, looking towards things that might help us more with about good design principles in this situation. And also, I think we do, I'm fairly sure, have a waste service that we're part of that perhaps we'll be looking at some more creative solutions for us and our member councils, but that's all tied to a service agreement situation. So I think we're sort of in the middle of this process. So I'm happy to support what we've got at the moment.
Thank you. I'll take it in parts as requested. All those in favour of part 1? Against? It's carried unanimously. All those in favour of part 2? Part 2 against part 2? Part 2 is carried. All those in favour of part 3? Against part 3? Carried unanimously. All those in favour of part 4? Against part 4? It is carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, staff. Thanks, CEO. Okay, Great. 8 o'clock and all's going well. 10.2, parking policy principles, recommendations on pages 11 and 12. There is quite a bit in here. The CEO is recommending that we do some Latin thing here. But there's,
Sorry,
sorry, I didn't mean to diminish it that much, but how old are you?
it's law. It's his law training.
I learned Latin at, Blackfriars back in, anyway, some time ago. So I thought that suspending meeting procedures might help here. Otherwise, I'll be asking for a mover and a seconder for each item if that's what we wanted to do to follow this. And I thought we could probably do what we just did. So what I propose is that we suspend meeting procedures. There's quite a bit here until 8:30 should we need it. That's 25 minutes. All those in favour? Against? That is thus suspended. Okay, so we've had the report. We've had the previous discussion. Going through it in one by one, I think it's probably the way. I'm going to sort of push through. I'm sure we get a chance to all speak. We asked for a principles document, and here it is. If there's any level of discomfort with that, someone should speak up pretty quickly. If not, I'm going to push on and say, okay, the report should be fine. Item 3, principle number 1, part A, that no time parking controls will be applied to any area unless a clear need is demonstrated. Has anybody got any discomfort with that or some comments, Alison?
Yeah, going back to the previous one, and I'd hope definitions are kind of standard in a lot of the stuff coming to us, because throughout here there's critical and whatever. It doesn't talk about 70%, 30%, evening, daytime, and there's big holes you can kick through it. So again, someone can make it critical if they ring 10 times in a week. And that seems, well, look,
We'll get to the critical item.
Yep. So I just, yeah. So I we'll push on. Yep, that's fine. But
That's okay. Sorry, yeah. No.
Sorry, my view, I think almost similar to what Councillor Becker is saying. The term clear need and this has been throughout, they're very subjective. And that's okay because it gives a little bit of wriggle room, and I'm really comfortable with wriggle room because people know my views on these issues. So I'm comfortable with a bit of wriggle room, but we just need to be comfortable with that wriggle room because my clear need is going to be very different to yours, which will be different to yours. So, but this is a principles document. I think it's okay for a principles document, but when the rubber hits the road in terms of the detail, we need to be a little bit clear about those issues.
I think the issue here is how much we're prepared to delegate to staff in interpreting that. And if we're not prepared to delegate it, we can say just bring it to council. One of the recommendations here is anyone who wants more than one permit comes to council. We'll get to that, but that's a way of dealing with a lack of clarity because some of these things are just, how could you define all the permutations? And we've been around long enough to know the parking craziness that people present to us. It's often really, really bespoke. Yeah, but that's a good pickup. Clear need is not demonstrated not defined, but I agree, the intent's really clear.
Yeah, nothing wrong with the intent. It's just the application is going to be challenging for us in the first few.
CEO, you want to comment on that at this point?
Through Mayor Lachlan, I think again the focus here is that this is about principles. Members, you'll recall when we brought the draft policy to you in a workshop. My understanding, not having a massive amount of history in this council or in this issue in this council in the past, the draft policy that came before you was extremely detailed and covered a lot of ground, and maybe it did still, even in itself, miss certain definitional aspects. But I think the feedback we received, certainly that we took away as staff, was what you're looking for is a higher level consideration of the broad issues around parking to inform a new policy. The policy should and will capture definitional areas. I'm not saying we're going to get it perfect, spot on first time, but the idea here is to create a framework of thinking for us as staff to revisit the question of a draft policy to bring back to you, without, again, bringing a policy to you and having to go through a 40-page document line, maybe not 40 pages, but a significant document line by line. Rather, give us the high-level thinking that we are going to apply to the exercise of bringing you back a new policy draft. Understand that there's going to be significant work involved in getting the policy on the back end of that correct. That's not what this is about. It really is a high-level strategic exercise to think through what parking should look like. And if, look, I've made a note of this, that we need to be very clear in terms of the definitions coming out of it and make sure that we define very clearly the process that this will inform. But at the end of the day, this is really about, from our perspective, getting some guidance on what the policy should look like without going through line by line a 20, 30 page document.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
On item one.
Yeah, item one, I think the general principle, basically no controls unless necessary, as on page 14. So we are looking at broad principle, and that outlines our core position in relation to parking controls. And there will be further explanation of our principles, more in the document after we're going to get, after we go work through the principles, there'll be more detail.
Yes.
So that we can explain that. And it has to be demonstrated. So I think that's one of the key words. And also I think it leaves enough in case, even with all our collective wonderful minds, there may be something that comes up. If we get too prescriptive, or if something else sort of happens. So I think it's a good start for a parking policy principle.
Yes, and I think the CEO is committed, so there needs to be a policy that makes this work. This is not the policy. I was just thinking in terms of when this gets reviewed, but I think Principle 2BD talks about a review over time. So you don't set it in stone. It's another thing we don't actually have at the moment, a process to say, is it still required? Yeah. Let's move on to Principle 2. And I'm happy to go through it in bits, but say, A, these are the controls. A, be no more onerous than required. Seems logical, doesn't it, that we don't use a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. What about B, be flexible enough to provide a range of options, probably more particular around the village heart than the average street around a school, but even schools have different types of zones around them, so that makes sense to me. Happy with that. C, locate shorter stay options relatively closer than longer options.
What's relatively mean?
And I think that'd have to be a case by case, wouldn't it? So in a school, there's a kiss and drop right by the gate. In a shopping precinct, it might be 100 metres, which is much further than a kiss and drop tolerance.
Do we need the word relatively?
Yes, yeah. Through you, Mary Lachlan, the intent of the word relatively is in relation to each other. So short term, take for example, a certain coffee shop here in Prospect Road that has 15-minute drop off and pick up right out the front. Okay, that's fine for a 15-minute. I need to stop and grab a coffee. But if you're going to visit the Prospect Village Heart to see a movie and grab a meal afterwards, you're probably going to need 4 hours. 15 minutes not appropriate relative to the 15-minute parking space. What we're talking about there is that those 4 hour spots will be further away from the village heart. You're going to have to walk a little further to the village heart compared to your shorter stay options in order to secure that longer term parking space. That's what the intent of that principle is.
Yep. That's a good question. We're making some principles here. Staff have to work out how they deal with a grumpy person who wants an outcome, and they'll need to put some definitions around it to protect themselves from making arbitrary decisions. That's not what we want. What about D? The process for initiation and or review be established. Seems sensible, doesn't it? So how do you start this process? How do you review this process? Can't just be, someone taps a mirror on the shoulder and says, "Hey, buddy, can I have?" That's what someone did last week, and I said, "You write a letter to the CEO, thanks." So,
I did.
It wasn't you. All right, Principle 3, Sorry, Christine.
I'm just still working through. So for process for initiation and review, process initiation or review. I'm just wondering why we wouldn't just have without the or.
Yeah, grammatical. See ya.
If you're going to initiate something, then surely we want to review it.
To use the English language, Mary Lachlan, I'm happy to take that.
We don't need the and. Okay, with the minute secretary to note the deletion of the and and the slash.
Yeah.
Sorry, Al.
Before you get to the, look, I had a couple of questions. I'm not even sure where some of them fit, but I think maybe one here that we just went through, see short term, long term, and things like that. And I think we're talking about not parking meters, but parking signs and that. In Adelaide City Council, and I'm just wondering, if possibly it's the same here, if you come with a disabled sticker and you park there and it says 1 hour, you get 2 hours. Do we have that same sort of setup here?
That is a state.
Do I? That's why I
That's a
asked.
state rule. That is a state rule across the board.
That's a state.
Sticker gives you double the time in any zone, any council.
It does help that the person that the ticket applies to is somewhere near the vehicle at some stage.
Yeah. Oh, that's all right. We got a couple, but actually we got 3, but the other one expires in March 6th. But so that is,
it's universal.
Hard to try and find out the answer. One I got, then I'll bring up that I do know, and then I'll ask the other question.
No problem. So in CA, no restrictions of any kind be imposed unless a critical local parking conflict identified and verified. This was raised before by Alison. How do we define what critical is? Because that's a huge, vast range of someone else's. CEO, can you?
Yeah, through Mayor Lachlan, I think that's probably something we'd have to explore in the drafting of a new draft policy. But again, taking away from the workshop discussion that we had and the discussion that we had internally with staff around framing this principle, we took away from that parking permits are meant to be an exception. A permit zone shouldn't just be because there is a local challenge around parking, but if it's a significant challenge and it's one that's intractable and strategic in nature, for example, caused by a complete lack of off-street parking as a result of historical planning outcomes in a certain area, or a narrow street, or those sorts of things, I think that might trigger a discussion around this and the possibility of a parking permit zone, especially where there are conflicts with public land uses like railway parking, that sort of thing. That's sort of what we were thinking. But yeah, then there might be, and this is, I think, is where the challenges might arise, where we know that there are certain particular, perhaps not necessarily publicly driven parking conflicts, but they exist at certain times, and I refer to potentially certain spiritual or religious uses around the city that can create very short-term but very intense parking conflicts. And the question of whether or not those would be captured by parking restrictions go beyond what we've invited council to consider as part of these policy principles. I think that's something we'll have to flesh out in the policy document. But really what we're talking about here is trying to define parking permits as a significant exception to the rule of timed parking. If you're instituting timed parking, it's because you need it. That's principle 1. If you've instituted timed parking, you follow principle 2 in establishing the right time frames in the right areas. To get to principle 3, that's not working. And it needs to, we feel, be a significant step to get there. That's what the word critical is meant to capture, but I accept that can mean different things to different people, and there's a bit of work.
You articulated it just perfectly there. It would have been nice to see that in the report.
Yeah, I'm sort of CEO is very grateful for that.
I'll try and get the recording.
It's very hard to have that distilled into a principles document. So there are challenges with distilling it. If we're not happy, we can change the words, but that is the challenge. I'm wondering whether fundamental might be a better word than critical, given that critical might imply some health
Critical to me, yeah.
And then there's a critical to who is it critical to? And I don't want to wordsmith, unnecessarily, but fundamental might mean it's actually got to be a really basic conflict. As in, the one we know about is if you don't have any driveway at all, you have a fundamental lack of off-site parking available to you. It's not critical in that sense.
Latin word for critical?
Yeah.
In extremes.
Through the Mayor, look, we're open as a staff body to guidance. This is meant to be a strategic process, members. We're really after some guidance from you as to what you feel should be guiding the drafting of the next policy. So please, by all means, we're not precious about the words. If you feel they can be improved, by all means, we're open to that.
It's fundamental a better word. People more comfortable with that word instead of critical. Yep. If you've got a better one, throw it out there. Christina.
We've got no permit restrictions. So I think it's a bit superfluous to say of any kind. I think the less words, the more, no permit restrictions to be imposed. Pretty clear.
Actually, the construct of that one grammatically is a bit interesting because we normally issue a parking permit rather than a parking restriction.
Yeah.
Can I just understand the use of the word restriction versus permit? Is it deliberate?
Yeah, through Mayor Lachlan, I'm trying to put myself in my head when I drafted this because I did draft this particular one. Firstly, I apologise for my legal training. I think sometimes I feel I get paid by the word and that creeps back into what I write. My apologies. In relation to restrictions, permit restrictions mean restrictions against the timed parking. So that's what I was intending to say, but I fully accept the fact that you could say that a different way that might be clearer. But again, I thought through in drafting these principles, the way we approached this was starting with first principle, second principle, third principle. So a permit restriction, as we saw it, was a restriction on timed parking in a certain zone. So take the point though that in reality what you're really talking about is permit allowance. It's probably a better word for it, or something to that effect.
Yes. I was just going to push on. Someone give that some thought while we're travelling. Is that okay? Somebody somewhere. If that's you, then I apologise for that. We might move to B. That in the event such a conflict is identified, and just going back to, we changed that to fundamental. The word conflict stays in there, but anyway, the word so B can still refer to a conflict. Is identified any permit scheme be limited to that which may be required to address the conflict in question. A good example is some resi parking permits are only from 5 p.m. onwards, so when you get home from work, you can park your car because that's the perceived need in the entertainment zone is that the nighttime car parking is the problem. So that makes sense to people. B is okay. But C, that a scheme only include 2 permit types, residential and temporary special use, which of course can mean anything. But part D is also in this here that no business or carers permit system. We discussed that carers permit system before, so it's a bit of discussion C and D. Alan.
Well, that's the business one. Okay, that's like the carers one. And hopefully before this council finishes, not tonight, we've got a few more meetings, is that maybe this disability group might get together and look at the carers permit one. And the reason when we had talked about it before, and I've spoken to actual nurses that go out and do the people in the homes and stuff like that. Yeah, you have a situation and they're not supposed to, like health and safety, park in a person's driveway, particularly, and I'll just say here, particularly with violent people and things like that. So I think we should wait and that disability group gets together, perhaps chat about that particular one with the carers permit, because I can see, well, I can actually agree that we'll blow it. They can park up the road like anyone else. They're only doing their job and they're going. But there might be those particularly medical situations that they don't want their car far away because they have the violent sort of stuff. They also have medical stuff in there. I think that D, we should discuss in the disability thing and have people that understand it that put it to us.
I think it's an excellent suggestion and solved here by removing the words or carers permit.
Yeah.
Just not spoken about at this point in time. Let's see, that workable?
Through Mayor Lachlan, yes. And the other thing I point out is that it's also possible that you could work in a use like that through a temporary special use permit.
Yeah.
The intention of the temporary special use permit being a little broader was to give us the freedom to potentially work those sorts of uses into it. But again, a matter for council.
Yep. I think is that a good landing spot at the moment? Okay. Part E, the temporary special use be restricted specific to the issue that they're talking about, whatever it might be. So it's not a blanket. It has to address the issue. That makes sense, I think, doesn't it, folks?
Sorry, can I just comment on that one? The only problem with E is it's limited to a maximum period of 6 months. So if I think of the carer's permit, RNDS or someone coming to visit somebody in their home, it's likely to be longer than 6 months.
So
Is it,
But we,
without review, you can reapply after 6
and
months.
we could delegate that process. I mean, so yeah, that's
yeah, through you, Mayor Lachlan, that was the intent. The 6 month review was meant to capture, again, they're supposed to be temporary. These are not permanent uses, not like a residential permit which attaches to a landowner, for example. That was meant to be the distinction. You could extend the review period, you could delegate it. There's a number of ways you could manage that. Again, noting these are principles. We're not pretending they're perfect. We're here to work through this, and absolutely happy to take on board suggestion.
Mark, are you suggesting that 6 months is too tight in a principles document?
It's probably the only time in here where we've been very articulate around a particular issue. So the rest is very principle based. 6 months is not. 6 months is a bit of operational detail.
We could delete the of 6 months words. And
It could be 6 months in the drafting of policy, but for a principles document, it might be better left out.
If I can explain, the reason it's there is, again, I do remember the
Resourcing.
6 month period coming up at discussion at the workshop. However, and again, open to direction there.
what people's thoughts on that?
I'm comfortable with 6 months because it's also the idea of resourcing it, because I think we could have a really labour intensive permit system if we wanted one, which I don't. So I think 6 months. But look, I'm happy to take it out, but I also understand that maybe that's come from a management operationally.
We need to find temporary, isn't it? How do we give the staff guidance in a principle base? We think temporary means 6, or we think temporary means 12, or we think temporary is up to you to determine what that is. And then they're a bit vulnerable to someone saying, well, you gave them 12, I want 12.
Negotiated period.
Because if you're doing a bathroom, it's a 2 month permit. If you've got an older person in the home that needs medical care, it's a 3-year permit.
So this is a maximum period. So 2 months is possible under the principle. It's whether we want to say give the staff the ability to determine the period, or whether we say, no, there is a point at which we deem as elected members that's going beyond temporary.
Well, I think this goes back to Alan's point about the carer's permit, because we've pushed the carer's permit back up to C, saying the only way we can capture a carer's permit is through a temporary special use permit. Then we go down to E, and we're saying that's a maximum 6 months, which I think conflicts with recognising the review, but it conflicts with the issue of, well, that carer's permit should be there for as long as it's needed to be there, which might be longer than a minimum or maximum period.
If you come, David, and you get this piece of paper that's your permit, you apply down at the front desk, you get it, and somewhere in there is written 6 months, and then alongside it can be and or, and then they explain why they want and or, and then the person then puts 12 months or whatever in there. So if I just come and I need it because I live there or something like that, there, 6 months there, and I'm not sure exact words, but something about it, circumstances, and then there's another gap, and you give them 12 months, and if they're alive after 12 months, you give them another 12 months, something along that line.
Look, I think the quickest way through this is to delete the words of 6 months and let staff work it out in a policy sense, because there might be different durations. Does that make sense at this point?
Yeah.
We should also just probably be aware of and to Alison's point, Councillor Backer's point, we shouldn't be creating red tape either for ourselves or administrative burden for ourselves or the agencies who are using the system.
Yeah.
There's a difficulty, I think, if you have a construction process, the builder might come and say, look, we're going to be here for 18 months, so why bother making me come back twice over? Just give me 20 parks for 18 months, thanks very much. And the staff might go, how do I say no? Because there's no definition around what temporary means, and that seems like a reasonable request. So I think we could let staff have a think about that. It might be and it might not be.
That's right.
Because at the start of a project, you might need 10 parks, in the end, you might need 30. For instance, but I think we want to be careful not to let this get too malleable. For now, that's it. Christina?
Yes. Just going back, I'm just wondering part D, if we just say that no business permit be enacted, because I think it opens up a can of worms if we just say straight out that no business permit or carer's permit. So I'd like to see carer's permit moved into something like E, that temporary special use permits, including a carer's permit system. Because that's what we're saying, basically, that we're saying we're prepared to have a carer sort of permit system, but it'll be in the temporary special use. But so I think we just say D, that no business permit system be enacted.
Well, we have agreed with that. That's up there, part D. That the words or carer's permit gets taken out.
Oh, right, okay. I need to raise my eyes.
Yes, that's all right. That's all right. Well, moving through pretty quickly.
Again, just business permit definitions again. Is that because we have lots of businesses and a carer can also be a business. So I think we have to be clear, like residential permits where people reside in a property, rateable property, blah, 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 in the city of Prospect. And same thing with business. It's not actually that if you're McMahon's building something, you can't get a special use permit. It just means if you're a rateable property, blah, 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 and you've got allocated off-street parking, you should use that. We can't give you
And again,
that'll come out. That's fine. But
I'm cognizant we've got to 8:30. We're not there yet. Probably another 10 minutes. Just seek leave to suspend meeting procedures until 8:40. All those in favour? Against? It's carried, and though we carry on. Part E we've dealt with. Part F, resi permits be limited to areas where no off-street parking. Let's deal with part 1 of that. It's what we've done for years and years. So again, it's in the principles bit, Mark.
Look, I'm probably going to be a lone wolf on this one, but this is the principle in itself is good at one level, but is not going to hit the policy objective at another, I don't think, because if you think of a property where no off-street parking is provisioned in the original home design, you might have a property with no front driveway. So that's a very clear case. You might have a 3-bedroom house with a single driveway that can fit 2 cars in, and there's 3 teenagers plus 2 parents with 5 cars. I'm not sure that picks up that scenario. If it does, I'm comfortable with it. If it doesn't, then I'm uncomfortable with it. Because I think that's the biggest conflict here is we've got people in properties with single driveways with 4 or 5 cars as a result of teenage kids and adult kids living at home for longer, plus 2 parents with 2 cars. And there's an element of inconvenience, but it's also an element of not being able to fit them all in the driveway. Is that a house design issue or is that something else? So that I'm just on.
How do you determine if they're the cars of their kids? How do we get ourselves?
House share, and they're equally.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Go down that. So
well, exactly right.
Yeah. So I think it has to be broader than just people that've got teenagers. It can be house share situations. I'm not. That was an example. I'm saying properties with multiple vehicles and multiple people living in them. Doesn't matter what the construct is. The house design is probably set for 1 or 2 vehicles in the driveway, but houses are holding more people in them that drive more vehicles.
So you sort of say microphone.
And there's a bit of a
penalising. You could be effectively penalising people with properties that are, say, allow for 2 off-street parks, and so they have a couple of kids who end up with 4 cars, versus people who have designs where they have no off-street parking available and they're the ones who get the permits. It sort of could be viewed as unfair.
Well, I just want to make sure the principle. Yes, you're correct. I just want to make sure the principle is meeting the need.
Yes,
and I don't think. I think it could be argued that a home with a single carport and a driveway, we would argue based on that principle, well, you don't need any off-street parking. You're fine. You've got a driveway and you've got a carport and that can satisfy 2 cars. But hang on, I've got 4 cars in the household.
Correct.
How you understand there's 4 cars in the household, great.
Yeah, that's the trick, isn't it? And these things often end up being forever. That's the other thing.
So my personal example in my street, I've had neighbours have had teenage kids before they were teenagers, teenage kids. There's suddenly a multitude of cars in the street and lots of shuffling, and then they move out of home and it changes. So it is a changing environment and it moves all the time. But the policy doesn't allow us to be flexible. That would be my concern. So I wouldn't be supportive of that unless I can be convinced that it supports those sort of scenarios.
Because people with no off-street parking in that situation that end up, say, with a family living there, if they get access to permits, it could be viewed as unfair.
Yeah.
Can I just say a broader question? Given that we've defined earlier in Part A, you've got to demonstrate a fundamental parking conflict. So in other words, you've got to have a timed parking area outside your house to even bother worrying about this, right? But you've then got to talk about what the actual issue is, and the permit not only respond just to a time frame. you are entitled to a resi permit and you can have a temporary use. But then we go into more specifics. Do we need the greater specifics? Do we need part F1 or 2?
I'd probably say no, because I think we're opening a potential can of worms where we're picking favourites. You're picking unfair, probably unintentionally, potentially picking winners. Where you could have exactly the same family, exactly the same situation. Someone has no access to off-street parking, they get the permit. Someone that doesn't does. And to me, I don't think that's very equitable.
And it's inequitable because situations might change. It might be through council or a petition in residents that they want to have a driveway through some traffic treatment done. So you're going to lose possibly 1 or 2 car parks through no fault of yours. And yet if your home comes in the original, I just think we're starting to try and make it too complicated. That I think we try and simplify the principles and then it'll come back to us when we, with the exceptional, what is it, the word?
Part G deals with this.
Yeah.
So if you want more than one, it's going to come to council.
Yes, yeah.
And then we can have a debate around whether they're actual teenagers or whether they're running a car hire business like on Broad Road.
Yes.
Or whether they like their original. They like the original 4 cars and can't sell them or don't want to sell them, so they've got another 3 out in the street that they actually use. This is what happens. We've had before Airbnb, we had a homestay business that used to have no parking on site for any visitors. They'd all go out in the street opposite a house that had 4 teenagers all with cars. So we can deal with it on a bespoke basis as long as we're prepared to clutter up our council agenda dealing with these types of issues. Part F, the CEO is responding to us saying it's not a free-for-all. You can't just get a permit just simply because you've got lots of cars. Now, how on earth do we guide staff as to what we'll accept?
And is it small cars, big cars, caravans?
Well, that's pretty clear in H.
Registered vehicles.
Clear in H.
Street.
Oh, all right. Okay. See, we're testing it ourselves. So
if we take out Part F,
yeah.
understand that means everything beyond 1 will come to us as full council in Part G.
And I think that's a problem because I think that's an operational matter for.
Definitely.
So therefore, what guidance in principle do we give staff around not bringing everything to us?
Well, does it not go back to your reference before around need? In the event of where a conflict is identified. So you could still remove F and the guidance is in principle 3 part B.
Yep, but G restricts it to 1.
Yep.
Anything beyond 1 comes to us under G.
Well, we could restrict it to 2.
But that's not fair. There's a family of 7 and there's a family of 2 or a retired couple and they've only got 2 cars. The family of 7 is penalised for, the children having cars. That's not fair.
But then we get back to the principle that actually I don't think has been worked through, and that is that we are talking about people parking on a public space.
Right.
So it's about equitable use of our public space. So I think we need to keep that in our mind. And yeah, I mean, if your family circumstances change, well, they change, but you've got to accept the fact that it's not your private parking space right out the front of your place or across the road or somewhere else.
This is the issue, isn't it? So just hear from Alison, we'll try and draw it together.
Just a quick one. Again, very well said, Councillor Barnett. In regards, we've got a whole planning and design code, and that's supposed to deal with parking. So often the things are historical, and I'm very much in agreement with what's on the screen. There'll be differing views, but we've also got the economic development team around here, and we've got different, needs with school groups. So when we're saying fundamental, it's just coming from a family home ownership. That's not a balanced discussion. But I don't want to have those discussions in front of. I think it's an operational thing, and there needs to be a table or something.
Okay, so what I'm going to suggest is that Part F stays in, and during debate, someone can choose to amend it to take it out. We can debate it formally and take it to a vote if we need to. Part G is pretty clear, anything beyond 1. Now, having said that we don't want them all coming to us, Part F serves to really limit what will come to us in Part G, I think. So is there any further comment on Part G? And H seems sensible. Try and stop.
Just with G, and I the risk of trying to wordsmith it, which I don't think we should do, but could the principle be that there's a relationship between the number of permits, the number of vehicles, and the number of vehicles that are able to be at the property? Because that's a linkage we've all been talking about. I can fit 2 cars in my properties, but I've got 4, so the net difference is 2. So the number is actually not relevant unless we consider the house, the number of properties, the house, the storage, and the number of vehicles.
So I've got a really long driveway that can fit, say, for instance, my last house. My last one. Yep. Now I could have put 4 cars down it, and I put a fence across to make the back 2 parks part of a courtyard. Why should I then apply for 2 car parks in the street? Because I've made a choice.
Yeah. Made a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't have a problem with that lifestyle choice because you've probably got 4 kids in the house that need somewhere to play at the back, rather than storing the vehicle.
Well, the planning and design code says,
Public space.
this is the amount of space you need, and it's 25 square metres per bedroom, and if you've got that in the rest of your property, then you don't need that courtyard, so you don't get your permit. This is hard stuff. That's what F1 is trying to do. If you've made a decision to shorten your driveway, don't expect to get the balance out of us, because we're trying to make the shops trade and they need customer car parks. And if we can't give the customers car parks, we'll have to pay for a car park that costs us $6 million. We know that's what it'll cost because we've done the numbers. So isn't this what we're just trying to sort out? It's messy.
Why can't we put those design principles in there as the reference?
They're elsewhere. They're in the code, and they don't affect old houses because they're existing.
I also think, though, some of this is as it applies to timed areas in residential streets. They're not necessarily competing with shops; they're competing with their neighbours. I think of somewhere like Churches Street, where there's timed parking. There is no existing other use in Churches Street other than the residents because the public transport thing's gone out the window.
Well, hopefully they'll write to us asking it to be lifted. But around here, it's all resi other than Prospect Road, all the parking. I'm going to call us into formal. I'm not saying I'm not going over this quickly because it's simple. It's not. We see us done a great job in trying to distill down.
Have we done D? 4?
Yep. 4. Sorry, hang on. 4D. That's something bold of mine. But that a permit system be operated on a cost recovery basis. And the staff will need to define what that means. Anyone got any objection to that?
Slightly. Parking permits is the cost of doing business in council. I don't think it should necessarily be borne 100%. Maybe not 100%, some percentage, but not 100% by residents who are using it. Because there's a very slippery slope about, we talked about waste earlier. We talk about library facilities. We talk about, do we have to charge people parking on a white line, hockey stick in Myrtle Street? But where does that start and finish? So I think there could be a cost to the permit, no issue. But I think if we're going to look at cost us 3 staff to administer over 12 months divided by 10 permits that we issue out, that's not going to work.
This is an opt-in service, though.
Yes.
What are people's thoughts? Stay in at this stage? I'll take it in parts. So that there's any reason it shouldn't stay as it's currently worded, and you can determine how you vote on it.
It's worded flexible enough that it's not saying 100% of the cost is recovered. I'm just offering that up. I think I'll support it in its right.
Feedback.
I just think it's not 100% cost recovery. Mayor, I know we've run out of time. We're running out of time.
We're now asking a question.
I'm happy. Can I just ask a question in relation to Principle 3, Part H, which we kind of flipped over a little bit. Parking permits don't exist with vehicles that are a truck, trailer, caravan, boat, bus, motorcycle, or conditionally registered. I've been dealing with one, which Vince is well aware of, an issue which involves a truck and a parking permit in a time zone. It's a very complex matter. So I'm not sure I can support that, because I'm not supporting that we have B doubles in our residential streets, but a tool of trade for a local worker, for a small vehicle that's probably categorised, I presume, as a light truck or a small truck, very small truck, becomes a bit of an issue for me, just in terms of that particular example.
CEO, where there's rare exceptions to this because we've found a particular issue, do these principles get in the way of that remedy being available?
Depending on how inflexibly they were applied, they could. I mean, I believe, through you, Mayor Lachlan, that there is a solution to the problem you're asking, or you've raised. That would be to either apply a gross vehicle mass limit to Principle H, the GVM 4500. I think that GVM 4500 is a car licence truck. We all know that those trucks are not likely to be huge and marginally larger than a car at best. Or you could do something like that. Certainly, in reading this, I would anticipate truck as anything that you would require a medium rigid license.
Okay, great. No, perfect.
So if we put the words in front of truck up to GVM 4,500 tonne truck, is that appropriate?
GVM 4500 would be sufficient.
Yep.
GVM.
Gross vehicle mass. Isn't that what it is? GVM?
We're all car people here. Well, you are actually. I'd say.
Truck people. That's a truck person thing, and a caravan kind of towing thing. And
I wouldn't dare have it on my street.
Yeah. Carrying heavy beers around, I can get you in trouble at the Weybridge. Up to a.
This is a truck person.
Yeah, does it make sense? Okay, so we're back in formal session. Thanks for that question, Councillor Groot. I have said I'll take it in parts. I have asked the CEO's advice before in terms of part one. Given that I've said I'll take it in parts, is part one necessary as part of the resolution? I consider it's not necessary.
Mayor Lachlan, you're in control of the meeting. If you take it in parts, you're entitled to. The reason why the recommendation was made was simply to call the meeting's attention to the.
No, I understand that. But in terms of what I'm about to ask someone to move, do we need to move part one, given that we are going to take it in parts?
That's entirely a matter for the council.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I would say no.
I think it's superfluous. Yeah. So if we ask someone to move from part two to then become part one and on, and I'm quite prepared to take it in parts, the parts being, I'll go through each of the letters. Okay, so even with 3F1, I'll do 3F1, okay, just for perfect clarity.
We need to do some as well, that noting report.
We always do that. I think that's helpful to do that. Okay, so ask someone to move the lot, and then I'll take it in parts as I've suggested. Somebody happy to move it and get it on the floor. Councillor DeBacker, do you wish to speak to it?
Look, thank you for getting this far. Look, there are differing views around the table, but like I said, I think you've distilled the principle, and I think the reassurance that I have is that we do have a policy that comes back to us. It'll have to go out for consultation anyway, and I think we need to be aware of the speak that we have in the next policy document, and possibly diagrams or something, or tables in the next policy document, so that our residents and businesses understand. So I'm really excited that we've got this far, and I'll be supporting, I'd say, most of the amendments, but I'll be interested to hear the debate around the floor.
A suggestion, so I have a seconder to get it on the floor. Councillor Wynne, do you wish to speak to it?
I agree with Councillor DeBacker. We've come a long way, and it's quite, I'm excited to see what comes out of it as well. So, been a very long time since I sat on council, and we've just spoke about it. So it's huge progress.
Thank you. Okay. Any further debate? Councillor Harris first.
I'll question first, and it's an easy yes or no, and just in case I've missed anything. So all the things we're moving here or talking about here is where there's signs that say you can't park in it. Because my question would go, and I'm not going to ask it if it's not going to count, is do we in the city have a 48 hours you can't park in well, my street's got restrictions, but say a street with no restrictions and how long you can leave a vehicle there. This is only for where there's signs, isn't it? Parking signs. And
So, yeah, through you, Mayor Lachlan, yes, that's correct.
then I'm not going to ask the question then. That's all right. And I'll just finish by saying I support it. There might be one or two that I'll vote against when it comes, but in the main, I think excellent, great job. Thank you, sir, for doing it. Thank you, the other character and the lady that's on the phone for helping us get this far.
Pretty inclusive. Councillor Green.
I'd like to move an amendment.
Now I can't second it.
No, that's why I put my hand up first. I'd just like to remove part F. So principle 3, part C, part F, part 1, part 2. So I'll just would like to test whether there's any appetite to remove that. And for all the reasons we talked about, I'm not going to go back into the middle.
Now, I'll take it that it should be debated because we've had the preliminary discussion. I'll go straight to asking you to speak to it and seek a seconder.
Well, having just said I'm not going to speak to it, I'll speak to it. That's how it works, isn't it? So, look, we've heard the debate. I just think this is it might have an unintended consequence, and this is really trying to balance up the needs of the person who lives in a house that has a piece of public land in front of them that they have used for a long period of time to park vehicles or for other uses, versus people coming into the city. And I think it's a different issue where you're 100 metres or within 100 metres of a shop front or a shop road, such as Prospect Road or other high traffic areas. It's a different matter again when you're in side streets that are away from those shopping precincts, where you are literally competing with your neighbours. And I think this will test us to start thinking about, well, what do we do in those spaces? Do we even need time parking there in the first place? And I think that's a good thing for us to be talking about, because that would resolve many issues. There's no doubt about that. So I just think this is probably setting a signal which is, I think there'll be an unintended consequence for this. It's probably, I think it's material to the principal document, and I think the issues will be debated out in the policy anyway, but my preference is for it to be removed from the principal's document.
Delete 3F1 and 2.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
I'll test it.
Councillor Rip, wish to speak to it?
You know,
Okay. All right. Further debate. Is there any? Doesn't have to be. Sort of check. Okay. That concludes debate. I'll now put the amendment to delete principle 3, part F1 and 2. All those in favour of that deletion? All those against?
Division.
It is thus deleted. The second thing you've asked for is a division. So I'll declare it lost. Now there's a division. And we asked the people who voted against it to stand up. Have the names recorded.
Yes. That's you.
You can change your minds. There's effectively another vote. All those for. I just have that firstly. All those for. Thank you. All those against. And if you could stand up, have your name recorded. My apologies, but that's slightly wrong. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And those names will be recorded. Secretary, all set. Thank you. And the item is still approved, and therefore parts F1 and 2 are not part of the motion going forward. Councillor Groot, did you have anything further?
Look, just to echo the views of others, thank you for bringing this to us. It's a tricky issue. Yeah. This is not easy. It'd be really nice if we could get this resolved, though, before the end of this council. Because otherwise a future council will have to start again from scratch and we'll potentially lose another couple of years before we get a result. So it'd be good to have this done by November or sooner.
Thank you. Shouldn't have given you another bite because Councillor Ripstein has spoken to it as well. But anyway, sometimes you have a lucky day. Any further speakers to the motion?
one word too. That's a record for me.
Yeah. Lucky day.
Ditto. That's good. All right. There being none, Councillor Backer, do you wish to sum up the debate before I take the vote in parts?
Yes. Yeah. So look, I think there's obviously varying views around, but we're going to have a look at precinct by precinct basis, and I think we can't just look at it from residential focus because we do have an economic agenda as part of our community plan. We've also got community facilities, even the challenges of people getting to our own community centres and painting. That's been noted as a problem. So I think where people, on residential streets near a place like this, may have similar arguments to what you've heard on the floor today, we've also got to remember that we have people who have carers, who have children trying to get into the library. So we really have to have a balanced view, just not from our own personal view, and consider all users of the public spaces that are streets. So I'm really interested to see when it goes out for consultation that it's not just residents, that we're actually going out and consulting with businesses, potential people coming into the area who maybe are looking to do developments in the area, the schools and maybe religious organisations and their views on this as well. So I'll be really interested, along with the policy, what's the consultation plan? Because I think people will be really interested how it's going to affect them.
Yep, thank you. That concludes the debate on it. I'll now take the vote. All those in favour of part 2, which is now part 1, but I'll call it as it's in the papers. Against is carried unanimously. All those in favour of, I'll go on the screen because you made some changes. Part 3 is on the screen.
Just hang on, just principle 1, is it?
Number 3, principle 1A, just to be clear. Yeah. All those in favour of principle 1A? Against is carried unanimously. Principle 2, part B, A. All those in favour of part A? Against is carried unanimously. Part B. All those in favour of part B? Against is carried unanimously. All those in favour of part C? Against part C?
I didn't put my hand up, but I was with them. I was just taking time to read it.
I'll just do it again. All those in favour of part C? Against part C? Carried unanimously. Part D. All those in favour of part D? Against, it is carried unanimously. Okay, on to principle 3. All those in favour of principle 3C, part A, with the changes as marked in yellow. No permit, allowance or permission, this has been reworded to make it really clear, of any kind to be imposed unless a fundamental local parking conflict is identified and verified. Took out the word critical, and clarified restrictions means you're not going to get any permit of any kind unless you demonstrate this fundamentally. Okay, all those in favour of that part A? Yeah. Against? That's carried unanimously. That was good wordsmithing, necessary in that instance. Part B. All those in favour of part B? Against? It was carried unanimously. Part C. All those in favour of part C? Yep. Against? Nobody. It's carried unanimously. Part D. All those in favour of part D? All those against part D? Part D is carried, not unanimous. Part E. All those in favour of part E? So noting the change that the maximum period's been taken out and the policy will have to deal with it. All those against part E is carried unanimously. Part F has been deleted. Part G. All those in favour of part G? One permit unless it comes to council. All those in favour?
Oh,
I'll ask again. All those in favour of part G? All those against part G? Part G is lost. Part H. All those in favour of part H? All those against part H? Part H is carried unanimously. And before I forget again, principle 4D. All those in favour of part 4D? Against part 4D? Is carried. Okay. Thank you, CEO. Thank you, staff. Thank you, members. The team will now go away and work out what that means in the policy sense. I suspect the next step will be to bring that back to us, and then the consultation plan, I think, saw the CEO making extensive notes. So we're not out of the woods yet, but that's a really good move forward. Thanks, everybody. Okay, next item at 9 o'clock. The third item, 10.3, second budget review 2021-22, recommendations on page 29. Sorry, I've got a note here of a slight typo, is that? No, it's just in this version here, isn't it, Jaz? Yep. Somebody happy to move it in its current form on page 29? First time you've read it, like, hopefully, shouldn't assume, should I read?
Of
Thanks, Councillor Barnett.
board discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nguyen, do you wish to? Sorry, Councillor Barnett, you just said for discussion. I'm assuming he means not to speak to it at the moment.
Correct.
Councillor Nguyen, do you wish to speak to it?
Do you have it on the table for discussion?
Thank you. Open up for further debate. Is there any? Councillor De Backer.
Yeah, there was just a question about the cost of the temporary parking measures to do with Bloom. It was in the order of $25,000 or $26,000. I just wanted to clarify that through the chair.
As in why or what?
Why, yeah, it was so much.
Yep, that's okay. We have had that, but I'm happy to get the.
Yeah, thank you.
CEO. Director.
Through the Mayor, the $26,000 is the cost to purchase the required signs, poles, and have them installed as required to meet the standards so that we can actually enforce the temporary parking. But the sign plates plus the temporary parking control aspect sitting above, and also included the attachment accessory for stadium poles and the like as well.
We've received some advice that it's in that business centre zone, so they're probably going to stay in some form, so they might not be a lost cost.
Probably just another question through the chair for the benefits of the ratepayers. The rolling out of the 40 kilometres an hour signage through the whole of the eastern area was in the order of $50,000. So I'm just wondering, is the number of signs significantly different or the number of poles significantly different? I'm just trying to work out for only, was it 200 metres either side of Prospect Road or of the site? It seems to be quite a lot of money.
It's a value for money question. I think the 40k rollout across the whole city was 75 from memory. Could we just have some comparisons and explanation in that context?
Before I let Vince answer that question, there's one thing to note. I would imagine that poles were already in situ in relation to the signage. So in this case, we had to dig holes, sink new poles with cement to fix the signs too. That would have been the bulk of the cost, I imagine. Mr. Kamel?
Yes, through the Mayor. The cost was also added to because of our mobilisation time before Christmas and our ability to actually get contractors to do the work. Our staff were also involved in some of the attachments of signs and stadium poles, but materially it was to do with complexity of mobilising in the time period allowed. Plus, yeah, all the signposts have been installed appropriately to standard.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Councillor De Backer? You have the floor.
Thank you.
Any further debate? Councillor Green.
So I just have a question in terms of the contract you used for additional parking patrols, which was unfavourable at 38k, and the favourable adjustment was 7, which means we spent $38,000 on additional patrols and only got an income generation of 7, which doesn't seem to be good economics. So I just wonder if there could be some explanation. I'm not sure whether that's a fair comparison between those two numbers, but they are next to each other in the document. So
through you, Mayor Lachlan, the challenge we have there is that we've had a long-term absent staff member in that team. So in essence, what you're seeing is roughly equivalent resourcing, marginal increase in parking revenue.
Okay.
In reality, that challenge is that to maintain the level of parking enforcement we've been running, we've had to hire an extra person to do it.
Right. So just for clarity, then we're not getting an extra person's worth of parking patrols. We're getting an extra small bit of capacity around parking.
Through the Mayor, that's correct. It doesn't go for the entire period of the first and second quarters, but largely yes.
So can I just extend that question? Does that mean there's a saving elsewhere in the salaries budget because that's being pulled out of sick leave or long service leave or something? Is that why that contracted cost has come in?
So through you, Mayor Lachlan, or to you, Mayor Lachlan, not exactly. I don't know how much I can say without we're getting into some staff matters.
Okay.
It's not something I can particularly talk about over council.
I think the nature of the question is it's a net additional cost, but usually they result in a net additional over recovery. In this instance, that's not the case.
Yeah, Mayor Locke, it's not a sick leave situation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Group, still with you.
Oh, no, that's all. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I will make one other comment. The favourable adjustment of staff culture survey not being undertaken 15,000. Is there an intent to undertake that cultural survey this financial year?
So yeah.
Through Mayor Locke, no. The reason being that right now we're in the middle of a restructure. I don't think we'd get a representative outcome. My intent there would be to apply that money post restructure once things settle down. I think that'd be a good time to do it once our management team is settled to inform our next steps in terms of culture, leadership, values, that sort of thing.
Any further debate? Just from the chair, it gives me no great pride to preside over a budget review like this and a result like this. See, I've had some discussions. We know the large movement in here is to do with the revaluation of our assets. The accrual accounting position is pretty sick. The cash position has, as you've read in there, improved. The need to borrow is lessened. That's because projects are going to take longer to deliver. You might want to think in your own minds whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. But I have discussed with the CEO that the expenditure patterns need to be realistic, and sometimes they're overly optimistic and can't be achieved. So what the CEO has assured me is trying to do is to get those expenditure patterns to be more attuned to what's likely to happen. And that means that some of those outcomes will take much longer to be seen in the field. We've noticed that Stormwater project in Livingston Avenue, even any white marks on the road of Livingston Avenue, I went and checked this afternoon, so I can't even get excited about it yet. So the deficit position here is easily the worst I've seen at an operating level since I've been on council. It's quite significant. I understand the reasons for it, but I'm just saying it's not something I'm particularly proud of, nor am I really of things taking longer. But that's what's before us, and we're being asked to note those changes. And I really look forward to the budget discussions coming up, because I don't think they're going to be any easier than what we've got. We're just in a really tight spot for a couple of years. We know why. We know there's good things coming out of that. But this implication of the revaluation has made this harder for us at this juncture. Any further debate? If not, back to Councillor Barnett, if you wish to sum up.
Yes, I guess 2 out of 4 ain't bad in terms of meeting our ratios. Of course, we know that it's always a difficult situation in our council, and because of all the inflow of capital grants, which it's been quite big. It's been extremely unusual situation for our city. But I do note that our cash lending position means that council does have sufficient funds within the individual year to fund its budget. So I think that's a very important point to make.
Indeed. Thank you. That concludes debate. Now take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10.4, Investment Attraction and Economic Growth Plan Consultation Results. We still have one staff member with us to address this if there are any questions. Recommendations on page 54. Is somebody happy to move it in its current form? Councillor the back, do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I do. Look, I've been coming along to the roundtables as well, so I'm really interested in this area. However, I'm quite disappointed in the feedback, and I'm just hoping that we've really tried all avenues that we have to get some feedback from our community. And that's more broadly, people inside the area, outside the area, businesses. And I'm quite disappointed. I thought and I suppose knowing the people in that department, they're out talking to people. So hopefully through those informal conversations that the right signals are in here. One thing with the actual document itself attached, because obviously this is, I guess what we're adopting, the growth plan, is that it kind of looks and feels a bit like we were 4 or 5 years ago. I'd like to, see something that maybe reflects a little bit more our community plan in our messaging and our imaging and things like that. So I know Prospect Road has been very successful in establishing a brand. And I guess, you know, we did the smart cities thing and we had a whole sizzle around that. And I think maybe this is a broader discussion as part of this investment attraction, looking at things like the mini master planning of precincts. So that's sort of the kind of thing along Main North Road and in the east in Collinswood area. And I think a lot of that work really needs to be done. But again, coming to budget discussions, we need to have money to be able to do it. And I just feel that, you know, we can deal with these great things. However, we're going to need the money to fund it. So it might be a further discussion in council to look at some sort of key projects, if you will. We did have the village heart for a long time. So hopefully through the round table that will bubble up. So yeah, disappointed in the feedback, but I know that the officers are out there talking to businesses. So I'd encourage you to support it and get involved in the discussion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Barnett, do you wish to speak to it?
Just echoing Councillor De Backer's things about, I think, you know, it must be very disappointing to the staff who put so much sort of work into this. I think it would be good that on 7 there are opportunities for new growth, that we perhaps might guide us to have a workshop. I assume we'll be having a workshop on some of these things. Yeah, again, I think it's, if we've been around here for 4 years and seen a few of these, so it may seem that we're doing, you know, the same old, but I think we have had a different focus, you know, with a bit of change, you know, the way the staff have now been incorporated into this team, and we've got a newer staff person come on with the so they seem very knowledgeable and experienced, you know, in the area of or the business what am I trying to say? Discussions that we have and the potential, you know, for particularly on Main North Road there. So there's a lot to be said for this. And again, I don't know if we look to, are there any other councils that have been successful in getting, you know, survey strategies or that? But yeah, so very, you know, happy to second the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you. A couple of things from me. I'm really disappointed in the survey, and I'm embarrassed about the survey, and I think I'm embarrassed that it's in our public report. I'm just interested to know, in terms of when the feedback, well, when the survey was sent out, it says in late 2021. And when in 2021 that went out?
See you.
Mr. Adam. December.
First week in December.
Right, and it closed in mid-January. So 6-week campaign over Christmas and New Year is not the best time to be going out to anybody to ask them anything. So I think we've missed the mark there. The 3 surveys that came back with, so we have no female representatives, we have no business owner representatives, and we have no one aged under 35 or no one aged between 45 and 70. To respond to it. And so that's a real miss for me. And so I'd like to move an amendment to recommendation 2, because the recommendation 2 links our approval tonight to the community feedback. And I don't think that's right. So I don't think we can actually utilise the feedback as a reason to approve the plan. I think we should approve the plan. I'm supportive of the plan, and it's great work. But I think to hinge it on those 3 survey results, notwithstanding that they were good comments and they were legitimate, but I don't think we as a council should be basing a decision on the basis of 3 people's views, none of whom own a business in the city of Prospect or operate a business. So my amendment is simply to remove the words "having considered community feedback that." So the recommendation 2 just stands as council endorses the amended plan.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm happy to test the mover and seconder with that. Councillor Back, are you happy to incorporate?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you for the recommendation.
Yes. That was quick. They seek leave of the meeting. All those in favour of incorporating that change? It's thus incorporated. Thank you, Councillor Group. You wish to say anything?
Look, just to finish off, again, you know, the rest of it, fantastic. We've got a plan. We need to get on with it. But can this be a lesson for us not to go out for consultation in the community in December, during COVID, during a lockdown period? I mean, if we expected anything other than this, we were probably dreaming to a degree. And that sounds really harsh and critical. I'm not normally harsh and critical in the chamber, but as I said, people will read this as now put down in history that we put a survey out for 6 weeks over that period and got 3 results and tried to base a decision on that basis. And I'm just concerned about the perception that creates. So sorry to be a bit harsh on that one, but I actually feel quite strongly about that. So, but thank you for chamber for accepting that amendment.
Any further debate? Just from the chair, I want to echo those sentiments and perhaps ask a couple of questions. So we've got a marketing levy which gives rise to a group of people who decide what to do with that marketing levy. CEO, did we specifically approach that group to respond to the survey? Mr. Adams?
We did. We also spoke to them in the preparation of the strategy as well, and the prospectus in the preparation to the strategy. Back to them during the campaign. I think the comments around the time of year are true, and I think some of the effects on the local economy at the time that a lot of businesses were very focused on what was happening in their business at that time. That was probably unforeseen.
Okay, so our targeted groups didn't respond, but you're assuring us that they were involved in the development of the strategy. Okay, all right, thank you. And it's reminded me that we have a council resolution that requires a report to be brought to us, I think, every 6 months about how we're achieving our 1% rates shift to commercial corridor development. When you see any idea when the next one is due? It seems a long time between drinks.
Yeah, so Meryl, I'll ask Mr. Adams to take that in a second, but one of the challenges we've had there is the normal method we've used, generating that data, as I understand it, has been delivered from an officer who a position has been vacant essentially for 6 to 8 months. Mr. Adams, can you expand upon that?
Yeah, so the planning compliance officer keeps a record of where our current projects are up to, so that way we can work out the timing of when we're expecting a multi-unit development to start, when we're expecting to be delivered, and what time we expect its rates to hit the books. Due to a secondment, there's not been anyone collecting that data from the planning team. They've been trying desperately to fill that role, as I understand, but that data is well out of date at this point. We've worked backwards to do that, and I've been assured that someone will be moving into that role soon, and that process will get picked up again and that will be to council.
Just remind CEO, it is a requirement by resolution. Is it not possible to drive past the very few developments we've got in this city? There'd be less than 30 that have an impact on that report, and just work out whether someone's living in them yet or not?
Take that on notice. Don't see why not.
Okay, thank you. And in further to the report, I'm happy with this strategy that I've been with previous strategies. It's quite focused on some very simple objectives. I do think that there's some feedback required in terms of how our rate shift is going to further tune our efforts. I've always been a fan of saying let's invest in a strategy, but make sure we're getting a return on our investment. Otherwise, we're just taking ratepayers' money and wasting it. Without the feedback on the achievements, it's pretty hard to work out whether the strategy is correct, whether the resource levels are right. We might need double the number of people on this. We might need half. We're going to a budget session. I would have hoped we'd have some better feedback around achievement, not just a strategy. So I look forward to that report coming. I suspect that we'll want to revisit this when we get that feedback to make sure that we really are focused. Every dollar counts at the moment, and this area does cost ratepayers money, and I'm sure they'd want us to be really focused on making sure that it works for them as much as we would hope it does. Any further debate? Now that concludes debate, unless there's a summing up from Councillor de Back.
Was that an invite or?
Sorry, no. Is there a summing up from Councillor de Back?
Thank you for your input. But yeah, look, I'm very supportive of the area, but I agree that we need to see what we're achieving, not just what we aspire to, because we've been, investing in this economic growth for a number of years, and it's reassuring to us as the elected member body and also the ratepayers who pay for it that we are actually getting value for our community. So,
thank you. That concludes the debate. Now I'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against is carried unanimously. Thank you. That concludes reports for decision. General business or urgent items. Are there any?
Yes. There is, and it's on the screen behind you or next to you. So just a motion in relation to the murals that we discussed earlier. Do you want me to read out? I don't think I need to, do I? People can read it.
Would help because we haven't seen it before.
Oh, okay. Well, I've seen it before. The Council Administration provides a report to elected members at its April 2022 meeting, which seeks to confirm the location, type, artist and significance of murals located throughout the City of Prospect, painted on both public and private property. Second one is to provide details of any current or expired agreements with landowners in relation to the management of murals. And the third is to provide advice on options available to the City of Prospect to preserve and maintain current and future murals.
Just before we go to move that item, I'm obliged to ask whether the elected members think that's a genuinely urgent item. That's how we've structured the agenda, so that it can't wait until the next meeting as a motion of notice, in other words. So, first of all, I need to have leave of the meeting to incorporate that. Is it a genuinely urgent item? All those in favour? Or against? It is carried just. That being the case, Councillor Groot has moved it. Do you wish to speak any further to it?
No. I think enough's been said.
Do I have a seconder?
Yes.
I think I saw Councillor Harris's hand first. Is that you were seconding, you weren't asking a question?
I was going to second it and make then a bit of a statement. Why does it fit into an urgent thing? Maybe it doesn't. But when you look at some of the things that go on around, particularly the possum one at the moment, but more so one that has affected me in respect of young people coming to approach, and that is the tennis one up at Colin Grove that they wiped off of our property and changed, and then another one over at St Philip's that was changed. And so I think it is an important thing that maybe we can find a way to either save them, do them, create them, build on them and whatever. So provide that last line comes very important, because maybe we just can't do it. And some artists will tell you, if we had an artist, that murals and graffiti a thing is only a temporary move, but it's not the case in all of them. So I think they're so important. We've done it. It looks like we've missed out on the timing of it. Hopefully it can be rekindled. But the Australian mural, and I will always point out one thing, the Australian mural, and quite a few that Christina had been, Councillor Barnett, sorry, have been involved in, and others. A lot of these people are real people. All the one here on the history of Australia are local people. Really, they weren't in those days, but when they were painting the mural and the people all got together, they were people that lived in Beatrice, Alexander. So as soon as you see someone on there, was a copy of someone so many years ago, and you look at the ones that we've lost by the plumbing place on Main North Road, that were people that we had councillors here and others, and they got wiped off. So I'm totally supportive of this, that hopefully we can find a way to save them, fit them in with developments if it's going to be the case, but to really seriously look at it instead of having someone come and ring us up a week later and say we blacked it out or we painted over it, or the kids up at Colin Grove now haven't got their thing, and now you've got a business instead of the kids' stuff up at Colin Grove. I'm supporting it.
Thank you. Further debate? Councillor Barnett.
Yes, I think this is urgent because we've already got the prime example of the possum mural just going, and now we've also heard from one of our officers that there's a query over the Australia mural. I just think, I would have thought by now we perhaps would have had this information, because we've had this come up before, and particularly about options to preserve and maintain current and future murals. Because sort of, it begs the question of, people say, oh, well, the murals are only meant to have a certain life, but there are some of them that the community really, loves and wants to keep. So I think it does go to that point. So very happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor De Backer.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's urgent and there's urgent, different to people. But I do know there's probably a list of 101 things that the council administration has to do between now and April. And we do keep asking of our, administration, and I think I'd be happy to move till June. I mean, I know we've probably got some stuff. So, for example, the location type artist, that's already on the website. Details of any current expired agreements, I mean, the planning team should have that. But providing advice and options available, I mean, that's a report and that someone's got to do the research. Probably just through the chair, can I ask the CEO, would that be feasible before April, or do you think that we need longer for that?
CEO? Through you, Mayor Lachlan, anything's possible. It's just a question of opportunity cost. And there are some serious challenges. Obviously, members are aware that we don't have a manager in that space at the moment, not a permanent one. I'm not certain we'll have any manager after the end of the Fringe season. We haven't yet commenced recruitment for a replacement of that role, with an intention to roll that into the broader recruitment processes around new managers required. We have an arts officer. And again, it's a question of opportunity cost. Anything's doable. It's just a question of what won't be done. And I can't give you a clear idea unless Mr. Cunningham can offer any views.
Look, through the chair, nothing specific to add other than you're exactly right. There's only so far people can stretch. I can say within these walls and on camera that the arts officer is stretched considerably, given the role that the previous manager played in arts, and she's not around. And as of Thursday next week, we have no manager in arts and events, so the process will take some time to source that.
Councillor?
So with that feedback, I'd be prepared to, if I can, support an amendment that the third item be provided when possible, like no later than June 22nd. But if the other information could maybe send out by memo. So maybe this item 3.
Need to be quite specific. So.
Okay, be provided to council no later than June 2022.
Okay. It might be helpful to say, and further to the above, for that last item. Otherwise, it's bound by the April 22 date. Just check that that's what you're intending.
That's fine.
Thank you. Has an amendment been lodged? As is customary, I'll ask the mover if they're happy to incorporate. Councillor Group?
No.
No. Then it goes to amendment. Do you wish to speak any further to it? We'll have a seconder for the amendment. But when do you wish to speak to it?
I'm just thinking, given it's there's lots on coming up in the next few months, about staffing and all that, putting that pressure on staff. So I'm going to support the amendment. I'm just mindful of staffing and just timing and what has to forego if this was to be, put forward to us by April. So I'm supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Group.
I can speak to the amendment. Good. Let's pretend I can. Look, the only reason I didn't support it is that, the day could be May, it could be June, it could be September. There's always going to be priorities in business. There's always going to be things to do. There's always going to be other priorities beyond what we're requesting as elected members. I understand absolutely the pressures, but I also think most of that advice exists somewhere now. It's not we're going to have to go and start from scratch, particularly point 1 and point 2. And I worded it in such a way that it should be able to be lifted pretty easily from something internally. If not, then we've got other issues that we need to deal with. The third one is probably easy advice taken from a legal advisor. I don't think the arts officer would necessarily be the person that provides advice on what legal mechanisms we've got or what other sort of other mechanisms we might have to lock in ability to preserve, maintain murals. So I didn't see it as a piece of work that was so over-encompassing that was going to take someone offline for 3 months to do. I thought, in fact, I was going to push March, but I didn't. I put April. But I'm envisaging that to be the case rather than it being a full-time officer on this for 3 months, because that's not the intent of the motion at all. I think that's a stretch that is unreasonable for us to ask. But on the basis of what I said, I would support it being April. And if it can't be done by April, you'd come back in April and say, we've not been able to do it, we're going to bring it to you in May. But I just think if we want to do something, sorry, Mayor, I thought I'd finished. If we want to do something with the advice we get and it doesn't come back to us in June, well, we won't have an opportunity to do anything with the advice we get, because we'll be in caretaker very soon after that. So,
thank you. Further speakers to the amendments? Councillor Barnett.
As saying no later than June doesn't necessarily mean that it may not come earlier, but you can live in hope.
like Christmas?
Well, hopefully might have a staff position then.
Thank you. Further speakers to the amendments?
Well,
Councillor Rip.
I was in two minds which way to go, but I was originally probably going to support the amendment, but then council group made a compelling point that soon after we'll be in caretaker, so we're not going to have long to then make future decisions and get things happening after that. So I'm going to stick with, I won't support the amendment, and I'll stick with the original April.
Thank you. Any further debate? There is no summing up on an amendment, so I'll put that straight to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment? Those against the amendment? The amendment is lost. Now we return to debate on the item is moved up urgent business by Councillor Groot. Also have spoken to it, Councillor Barnett, De Backer and Gwynn. Any further speakers to that item? If not, sorry, I will speak just briefly. I try and run the show as good as my facilities enabled me to run it. I just want to say, asking for something to come to us by April is a very definition of it not being urgent. Just for people to note, this could have come as a motion notice in March in order to be fulfilled in April. So just letting you know, urgent means like tomorrow, CEO, we want you to do something, or next week, just for further noting. But anyway, you've made a decision, that's fine, happy to run with it. Most of these answers, Councillor Groot's quite right. The information is available, and Councillor De Backer said this too. The issue has been visited before. I don't mean to preempt the report, but unless we put something on the land title that compels the owner, and most of them don't want anything sitting on their title because they want to sell it unfettered, or we're prepared to pay money to them, like a lease, like a tenancy. These are very difficult things to get enshrined in an enforceable manner. And I expect that's what will come back to us, but they are our choices. The owner of the Australiana mural did want us to pay a lease fee last time. Staff were able to negotiate a different outcome, and so far we're not paying for it. But just bear that in mind. You might be asked to convert your love and appreciation for a mural into money, and that might give you pause for thought. So have a think about what that might mean for ratepayers. Thank you, elected members. If there's no further debate, Councillor Groot, wish to sum up.
Just to say our subjectivity of language has been tested tonight, I think, in a couple of these motions that we've been considering. So, urgent to one person might be tomorrow, to another it might be next month, to another it might be in 3 months, just as critical need or demonstrated requirements in parking permits might be different. But look, I support the motion. I think it'd be good to get something back. I suspect the Mayor is absolutely correct that there's no easy decisions at the end of this motion, and probably quite some difficult ones, but ones that at least we could advise the community about, so that community knows what our levers are, what we can pull, what we can push, and what we can do, and maybe importantly what we can't do. So I do commend the motion to the floor.
Okay, ends debate. All those in favour? Against? It is carried unanimously. Thank you. On to item 12, reports for information, and as per protocol, only items reserved by David. I'll open batting saying I wish to withdraw on 12.1 the Mary monthly activity report, because there's been a couple of things happened since that was published. Item 12.2, does somebody wish to withdraw that one? No. And item 12.3, the information from staff, enterprise bargaining, wages, budgets. Anybody wish to withdraw that one? No. In that case, I ask for someone to move items 12.2 and 12.3 on block. Councillor Barnett, there's no debate on block. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearce. All those in favour? Against, they carried. Against. There wasn't anyone against. They carried unanimously. Okay, item 12.1. I've asked for the updates to be put up on the screen for you there. And two things have happened. One is that the state government stepped in and cut down our trees at the end of Bourne Road and started ripping up footpaths, and the neighbours got very upset because they had no idea that was going to happen. Works were able to be stopped, and a meeting was called with the department representatives for 9 a.m. Monday about that work. And it's the first time the neighbours had seen the design, some of them. The others who complained saw it on the Thursday for the first time. The government are insistent on putting the activated push button crossing on the existing crossing location, which we discussed and gave them feedback that we didn't want. But they've also expanded the design to include a bike lane in the garden bed that used to have the trees as a screen between Vaughan Road and Fitzroy Terrace. That's when they cut them all down. So there's a few aspects within the design that we didn't want that I think the feedback was it's still pretty undesirable. They've taken that feedback back to the department to work out what to do next. So, and I know a lot of people are blaming us. It's not us. In fact, they declared at the meeting 9 o'clock that those trees were theirs to cut down. Well, one of the people there did. The second one was a meeting with Andrea Michaels, the MP, about our election document. It's just the first of those meetings. The election document is here for people to have a look at if you wish. It is as discussed. I think it was circulated for a bit of commentary by people. So check that out if you wish. And that meeting was scheduled afterwards. We're seeing the member for Adelaide tomorrow. And the opposition candidates next week, I believe, and there's cascading meetings with the candidates. So just thought I'd add that one in as well. Other than that, the rest of it is up to date as was published. So I'm happy to have someone move it as amended. Thanks, Councillor Barnett. Wish to speak to.
No, and just thanks for going into bat for our Braun Road Fitzroy Terrace fiasco. Not ours, but the department's, in my view.
Thank you. A seconder, Councillor Brute, wish to speak to it?
Could I just ask, maybe, Mayor, next time we meet, the election will be done and dusted. If anything comes out of your future meetings on the strategy document with candidates, are you able to brief us out of session just so we know where that's at? Is that appropriate?
I envisage that it'll be an announcement which the candidate themselves will want to publish. For example, I think the Labor candidate for Adelaide has published a traffic treatment at Rosetta and Howard and a park expansion at another location in the seat. And I'll circulate those as I get them. I think the Leader of the Opposition's promised a new aquatics centre, which I've circulated. And
as has the Premier this evening.
Right, this evening the Premier has promised something. I haven't quite put up with it. So if I get notification, you will get them. If we don't and they offer us something else, then I will do my best to let you know where that's at. And I have asked the CEO to use this document to put up a list on our social media to let the community know and what the candidate's response to that is in very simple terms, so that it's nice and clear how they respond.
And my apologies, have we got a final copy of that?
I doubt it. This was printed at 2 o'clock today. So CEO, can we distribute this final?
And well done. I think it's good to say. Thank you.
Councillor Barnett.
Well, I think
Councillor, you've already deemed to have spoken. Did you have a question?
Question, yes. So I think the Mayor was aware that also the Regency Road, Main North Road intersection.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Yes. Member for Enfield has announced a $250,000 study for the Regency Main North intersection and a further boost from the Shadow for Transport as a promise to upgrade and beautify the area bounded by North Park on Main North Road. I don't have the written detail of that to hand, but you found it on a Facebook feed.
Very, very vague. It just mentioned 250K for the for the plannings. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. CEO, can we distribute that? And can we get clarification from her office about the other amounts you referred to, just so it's in writing for you? And we'll compile those so we can see what's going on. Thank you, Councillor Bennett, for the question. Any further debate?
Can I just check, just based on other election cycles, obviously I've only been involved one with the City of Prospect. Have we given this document before, a month before the election's out? Because I'm just thinking also, have we left the run late? Obviously, obviously there's still a month to go. Just concerned in terms of some of these, the reviews of some of our items, they might take extensive time for either parties to look at. So I'm just concerned that if someone can comment on that, as I haven't been involved in a previous City Prospect cycle.
Question, CEO.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Lachlan. I'm pretty disappointed that we didn't have this done earlier.
Yeah.
I have to take responsibility for that on behalf of the administration. It's not good enough. Our desire was to have this done before Christmas. We have draft ready before Christmas. Working on it over Christmas and New Year has been difficult. We've had some staffing challenges, but I'm not making excuses. This is not normal and it won't happen again.
All right. Okay. Look, I just wasn't sure because of, and I appreciate the number of these projects are already in the realm, so they have been talked about before. It's not like we're just whacking new ones in there with no information for the parties to consider. But
that's another thing. Many of the asks have been fleshed out with candidates long ago and in the more recent past. Northeast Road, Main North Road are examples. But the document itself is a great tool for advocacy, and ideally we should have had a longer runway to deal with it. And just a further answer to that, it is difficult to defend the timing. It's not good enough. But what this document does is flesh out some discussions that we have had with particular candidates who've raised issues with us that they are interested in resolving. So we thought at some point we need to bring it to account to say we're talking to candidates about these matters. Main Street Fund, for example, was raised by one candidate in terms of responding to the parking pressures in the City of Prospect. The opponent to that candidate has not raised that issue with us, but now it's on the record to say we're asking for something like that. The tennis club expenditure is in the master plan. It's been approved ages ago. It's no secret at all. To the member for Enfield who we saw today, she said, thanks, I've now got a number. I had a number, but thanks very much. So
sure, okay.
That's old hat, but it's in the same document. And I guess we can say whilst it is late for state, it's the right time for federal.
Yes, no.
It's one document across all.
I was more meaning for state, yeah.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. Thank you. Anything further?
Yeah. So the other thing, following to that question from Councillor Groot's comment as well, if you could circle those type of things, or I'm partly wondering if we do need a special meeting at some point or in a special workshop, because say if we do get an item, a number of these items are going to be contingent on matched local government funding, and it could be matched local government funding in our next budget we're talking about. So it could actually have some significant implications. So I just double check each item that we put in. If we're asking for a matched funding commitment or anything like that, have we actually locked that money in for each of these items into the long-term financial plan? Because if not, and say we get both Rachel Sanderson and Lucy Hood promising X, Y, Z, and I hope for our city we do get a couple, but if we do and they're contingent on matched local government funding and say that local, and we would need to then confirm if we did get anything, what financial year that needs to be attributed to. Because if it's for the next one, that's going to add some pretty big. So I want to make sure that if we get all these promises in this document, say we got the best of everything, how are we going to fund it? And is that money locked into the long-term financial plans? If it's not, we could find ourselves in serious trouble. And I'll follow on from that. It's if we put this document out, in my opinion, into that realm, we're putting it out on the proviso that if they do come up with a commitment, the onus is on us to fund it, because the parties will come down heavy on us if they make an announcement and then we pull out of our funding commitment, because they shouldn't then fund any of it. Yep. So that's my opinion. I'm just
Is it a question you wanted an answer to?
Or? Yeah.
So in essence, the document asks for 100%. We're asking for a fund. We ask for 100%. We're not saying we'll match.
Yeah.
Except we were asking for a funding stream to be established, which will be by application. So, for instance, where we're asking for green tunnel support, we're asking for 100% of an amount to be provided, not matched. Where the Main Street Fund that we're talking about, we're saying please set up a fund that we could apply to have funds, in which case the CEO would advise us, well, what's our matching component of that at the time. I think CEO would be good when you circulate this just to clarify which items we are committing ourselves to in the ask. I don't recall any, but it's a good question.
So through you, Mayor Lachlan, I can answer that now. There's none. Now, having said that, I see where you're going with this, councillor, and you're right to consider this. It is entirely possible that match funding could be promised or committed to or announced.
So I don't think
some of these projects.
And I think it's reasonable.
And in most cases, you would find that these are projects that we are already partially or entirely committed to.
Right.
For example, Broadview Tennis, Barker Stormwater. These are projects that we've asked for the state or federal governments to commit to supporting.
Yeah.
They're projects that we'll ultimately have to proceed with at some point. It may require us to retime those projects in order to take advantage of the grant funding, and that'll be something obviously that we consider if and when those announcements are made.
Yeah.
And those particular projects would be projects I think would have a pretty long lead time. An announcement obviously would have to be followed by an election victory and then a commitment to that funding in the budget itself. So there's water to pass under the bridge. We're relatively confident that for most of them, they're all able to be accommodated. So if we get what we want, we're fine, 100%. But if we don't, in most cases, they're projects that we're already at some point committed to.
Sure. Yep. Thank you for the question, though. Oh, done. Councillor Backett.
Just one more question. Just on the document, again, it is regrettable that it's late. The other reason it's regrettable it's late, it's good to have community eyes on this as well. I mean, I don't know if this document's going to be in circulation for our ratepayers to be able to read and social media for them to comment on and put their own 2 bobs worth in. Is this a document that's going to be available and should be consulted on, or is it just a consolidation of what's already in our master plans and projected budgets and things like that anyway?
CEO.
So through you, Mayor Lachlan, I think that I've kind of answered that question with Councillor Ripp, in that pretty much all the projects are projects that this council's either supported in principle or in whole, either through the Forward Capital Works program, long-term financial plan, or through a prior advocacy position. So we've done our best, obviously, in preparing this not to take liberties. In terms of consulting with the community, I think, again, we've talked about going on socials with a summary of the asks. There's nothing confidential in this document. It is aspirational, and happy to go public with it. Obviously the candidates themselves, may use it that way anyway. So certainly happy to.
But obviously, there's a caution of there might be an expectation with putting all these wishes publicly as well. So I think that's the balance. But I'm just wondering how the document's being used and if the public's got access to it. That's all.
I suggest see on the back of that it's circulated to elected members first, and you're asked that you're okay with this going up as an information document. I'm just cognizant that you haven't endorsed this particular document, so I don't want to put it up there to say this is a council endorsed document or by implication. So have a look at it. If you've got any discomfort with it going up as an information document, that's okay. If you see any red flags, say so, because we've not done it before, and we can just reduce it to a simple list. Okay, so have a think about that. I don't see any issue with it, but it's a good question. But it's not council endorsed because of the timing. All good questions about the Mayor's report. And another thing, any other questions on 12.1? Any other debate, sorry, 12.1? Not Councillor Barnett, to just sum up. Okay, all those in favour? Against is carried unanimously. 12.2 is done, 12.3 is done. Item 13, council member reports and briefings. Are there any? Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, look, just quickly attended 2 or 3 citizen ceremonies, which I think I just find them really, really rewarding events. Seeing so many happy faces coming Australian citizens. The Mayor does a great job as well. And they're great events.
Lovely. Profoundly impacting events here. Thank you for raising that. Any other member briefings, Councillor?
Sorry, just following on from that, I also attended the citizenship ceremony on that day, and I just want to make a comment that the behind Wine Plaza, the marquee that was used that day worked really well. So I just want to have that noted that the arrangement and the setup was really nice, given it was a really hot day. Credit to Mayor Lachlan changing his speeches, which was great. And he didn't repeat what he was said in the morning session, so that was really good. But the marquee setup was really good.
Didn't have a tie and a jacket and a chain on, clearly. Any further council member? It's really humid. Those who remember those days, really humid.
Oh, yeah.
If there's no further council member reports and briefings, we'll go to item 14, motions on notice. Item 14.1 is a motion on notice regarding Back Your Neighbour campaign. It is from myself. It's in the papers, essentially to endorse me signing the Back Your Neighbour campaign letter as an expression of council support. The objectives outlined in the letter, they're on the screen. You've had a chance to read them. I've brought it to you. I've had a chance to chat with a couple of you over dinner, I think, because every now and again I get these campaign letters where they're seeking support from local government because the issue impacts on local government, and this is an issue that does so because people come and use our facilities and our services, our community services, and our staff are often aware of people who need support. Our JPs certainly get a lot of requests to help people with their documentation. The reason I brought it to you is that I don't feel comfortable signing on behalf of council unless you've had a look at it. This one said, we just want you to sign it as a mayor. When I went to look at how they used the signatures of mayors, they referred to councils supporting the program. I said, hang on, if you just referred to mayors, maybe, but you don't. So I'll take it to council and make sure they're okay with it. I don't see any problem with it. I'm happy to sign it, but because of the way they use it, I thought you needed to make sure you were happy with that so that you didn't see it somewhere and think, well, hang on, I didn't make that decision. There has been a bit of research done by the Director of Corporate Services, who has reminded me that we are a refugee-friendly zone. I had neglected to be aware of that, I must say, and dates back, as you've seen it, those who've seen email, back to 2003 with its origins in a request in 2002. We must have been an early council in that. This fits well inside that, but this has specific objectives in terms of the upcoming federal election, clearly, that fit within that refugee-friendly zone. So it is within an existing commitment we've made, albeit, I have to say, to elected members here almost 20 years ago, so it might not have been fresh in your minds either. So with that in mind, I ask you to endorse this so I can sign it, or give me clear direction not to. So I'm happy to have a seconder. I think Councillor Harris, I saw second. Councillor Barnett.
Yes, I'm happy to move this. It's within our
seconding. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So who's doing
I've moved it.
Oh, you've moved it.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right. So
I was going to, but I did that to you once before, so I'm conscious of that. Do you mind if I do?
No.
All right.
It's up to the chair to decide who's doing it.
Well, I did, but if you're withdrawing because you're recognising Councillor Harris as seconder, then
yeah.
Is that okay? Councillor Harris is seconder. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, thanks. Look, it was endorsed years ago, and as I think you pointed out in an email, Christina and I were the only two that were here, that are still here, that endorsed it, and many things go. I thought it was just before you come.
Endorsed it. Sorry, can you carry on?
Okay, that believed in it, and governments changed the hierarchy at the top, particularly the shopping boy and that they might not remember it. So it is important to bring these things up. And our tennis bloke that wouldn't get his needle and left, I think brought out to a lot of people, showed a lot of people that in that, particularly that hotel in Melbourne, where we have people up to 9 years that are still sitting in a room of a hotel because of visas and not being able to get in actual, what I would call genuine refugees, maybe not everyone else, but they are refugees of some sort of another to come in. We've just experienced, and very upsetting, a war in Afghanistan where a situation come where they brought people home, Afghani people, that brought them to Australia, that their chances of ever going home again would be totally non-existent. And we bring these people here, and unless it's changed in the last fortnight, we give them temporary protection visas, and then they live like that until someone's not happy with them and we send them away. We've got beautiful children sitting over in West Australia that just want to go home. And all this is visas that people control. And if you looked at that little blue bit in you people got on your thing, but it's in blue on here of those specific points we're looking at. And I believe we should reconfirm, endorse this, that what the motion that's come up before us, and say before an election, send back, say, this is how we, the representative people of Prospect, how we feel. And councillor up the end with the white shirt, he just talked about going to new Australians that come in and become Australian citizens. How proud should we feel of them? Why should we feel any less proud if someone's left a war-torn, starving or cruel country and come and tried to make us home? They should never be political pawns, and this line of thought here actually brings people into a position we can treat them as human beings that need a help and hopefully become Australian citizens themselves. Thank you, the Mayor, that raised it, and I thank our other councillors that were here before when we had a similar setup. So please, I ask you to vote for it.
Councillor Barnett.
Yes, ditto, and also I'm just wondering whether the mover might like to include the wording that City of Prospect as a declared refugee welcome.
Refugee welcome zone.
Yes, endorse the Mayor, etc.
You're proposing an amendment. It's the best way to handle that. So you're proposing to amend it so that the words "as a refugee welcome zone" after the City of Prospect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Minute Secretary, after the words City of Prospect, comma, as a refugee welcome zone, in capitals when you get to it, comma, endorse. I'll leave that to the CEO to fiddle with later. Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Anything? Sorry, I'll just check that as an amendment. I'm happy to incorporate it. Councillor Harris is second. Are you happy to incorporate it?
Yes.
To seek leave of the meeting to incorporate it. All those in favour? Against is thus incorporated. Thank you. Councillor Barnett, say any more?
No, I just think as a humanitarian point of view, and I think there are lots of other policies that we have as a city just support this.
Thank you. Any further debate? Councillor De Backer.
Look, I agree with all the sentiments, and certainly in reading about the campaign, one of the disappointing things on their website, there's for more information, there's a document for Greater Dandenong that doesn't actually open. I wanted to get into a bit more of the detail, but it's another area of possible cost shifting, I think, from federal and state governments, where I guess for a lot of local governments, we are doing a lot of that support, and gratefully, willingly so. But I think if we all three tiers of government can work better to support people in new environments and get the services they need, I think that's a good thing. So I'd be supportive of the motion.
Thank you. Any further debate? If not, I'll just quickly sum up. Thank you. It's really helpful to know that we're a refugee-friendly zone and that this is not out of the ordinary for us. I think it reflects the sentiments. It doesn't mention temporary protection visas. It doesn't ask for the legislation to change around the type of visas. That is a controversial issue. This doesn't ask for that. This just says improve the processes, improve the timeframes. No one can defend how long it's taking some of these people. Increase the funding to make it happen. We know you can't do much without money. Fair enough. Provide applicants equitable access to Commonwealth support programs. Sometimes they're denied access at all, which is not very good. And go to Councillor De Backer's point. We are doing the work. So increase the funding for us to be able to do the work in the absence of access to Commonwealth programs, because these people are in gaps. And I totally agree with Councillor Harris. I always find it, it just sort of sticks in my craw that we would go to war in a country, and the people who come from that country that's war torn say that they're not coming from a place that deems them to be refugees. There's no logic in that to me. That's, Afghanistan in particular. There are other places people come from that we've considered as refugees. And I think Syrians were welcomed in with open arms, with a much, much simpler process. So I think part A is really important. Improve the processes and the time frames. Clarify what the government means by refugees so everybody knows, and there's no confusion around it. So if this gets endorsed, as I encourage you to do, I'll sign that and we'll become part of that campaign to get these processes improved. Thank you. That concludes debate. All those in favour? Against is carried unanimously. Very long cup of tea being made over there. Perhaps. Item 15, questions with notice. Are there any questions? No, there are nil. Confidential items, item 16.1, enterprise bargaining and wages budgets. Somebody happy to move? We move to confidence. Sorry, I saw Councillor Harris first. Wish to speak to it?
No, thanks.
Barnett, happy to second? Do you wish to speak to it? Any further debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against?
Oh, sorry.
I'll put that again. All those in favour? Against is carried unanimously. Thank you. Public are now excluded. We'll take a short break if that, the doors have been closed or whatever. Catch you back here at